Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Policy and Resources Executive Subcommittee. I've just been advised that the meeting is being recorded. There is not the intention at this point in time to broadcast this particular version of the show. This is just a pilot, but if this is successful, politically we might want to have a discussion about broadcasting future meetings. Maybe something we can have separate from this. So, item 1 on the agenda is apologies, substitutions and declarations of interest. Sharon. An apology from Councillor Wilson with Councillor. Yeah, he's. Okay, welcome, Councillor Quinn. Okay.
Declarations, sorry?
Yes, any declarations of interest?
Yeah, just at item 3, we're talking about money for IL, so IL boards item.
So any member of the IL board, we can obviously record an interest. Okay, and also welcome to Councillor Jackson, who's joining us for item 5 on the agenda as well. Okay, so that takes us to item 2, COVID-19 coronavirus scrutiny report. So as previous meetings, I'm going to ask the Chief Executives if he's got any introductory remarks, and then we'll just go through section by section to take any questions or comments. Okay, Aubrey?
Okay, thank you, Convener. This is our normal scrutiny report, which has been provided since we started the PNR exec subs during the COVID crisis. General update on a number of areas, and the decisions that we've taken are included in the appendix. Members should note that in terms of recommendations, particular reference to approving the extension of the amended long-term empty council tax policy for a further period up to 31st of August, approves the allocation of £100,000 for necessary property costs to allow us to alter premises to facilitate staff coming in, keep them safe, and also moving the current car parking arrangements that we have in place on a temporary basis. The restrictions are still suspended up until the 30th of June. Other than that, Convener, I'll let you go through it if you wish.
Okay, so any member who wishes to ask a question as we go through, if they could indicate in the chat, and maybe just to keep it consistent, if we could all in the chat. I'm taking we all know where the chat is. Right, so if you get into if you go on the screen, you'll see the blue circle with a wee bubble. You click on that and that gets you into the chat function. Should come up at the side. So you just, it should be set to everyone. No, it's better, it's public, so it's set to everyone. So if you just put in below a message and just thing with so. No, just if you want to ask a question or comment, you just question, comment. You don't need to put in your questions, just to. Yes, I did. And Graham Brooks has got a question, but he's a bit premature because I've not started it yet. Okay. Right, okay, so starting at the HSCP section, which obviously is from paragraph 5.5 on to 5.6. Has anybody got any questions on that section? Graham, does your question relate to that section? No? Okay, no questions on that. We'll move on to Education and Communities, which is paragraphs 5.7 and 5.8. Any questions on that section? Graham.
Thanks very much, Convener. Yeah, it's just for a narrative on 5.8. Is the iZone at Port Glasgow has been opened up. It's a very, very small capacity. So I just wonder why we have a rationale of opening up a building with all the costs, and are we getting 8 young adults, young people in? Is it successful? A wee bit of story of why we've chosen a venue with such a small capacity.
Okay, Ruth, do you want to come in on that?
Through you, Convener, the 8 young people who are in the iZone are people we particularly want to see and are targeted young people. So yes, we're seeing it as worthwhile. the iZone hub around there it tends to be sort of primaries and younger children, and sorry, all of the childcare hubs tend to be geared towards younger people, and this is particularly geared toward the older ones we really wanted to see.
Okay. You okay with that, Graham? Right, Chris, are you want to come in that section, or was that just a test? No, we're not near that yet. Just that you want to ask the question, right? So you're on to 6. Linda, you want to come in 5.7 and 5.8? You're muted.
Yeah. Just a quick question under 5.7. It's saying that we're consulting with the Youth Council. Is there any plans to consult wider for we've got pupil councils in each school. Is there any plans to consult wider? Because I think pupils will have a wide and varied say on what the recovery looks like.
Okay, Ruth, you want to come in on that?
At the moment, we've had initial discussions with youth because they're the elected representatives, and the schools are engaging with their pupils in different ways, finding out what currently is the picture and what their experience has been like. But yes, as we begin towards our recovery, we will ask the schools to engage with their representatives of the pupil councils.
Okay, any further questions on the education and community section? No. Okay, I'll go into environment, regeneration, resources. I know Chris has got a general question. I'll bring you in, Chris, after I deal with any specific questions on that section. So any specific section questions on paragraphs 5.9, 5.10, 5.11, 12 through to 15. I've got a question in relation to 5.11, which is obviously we are still waiting on the report from Public Health Scotland. And the intention obviously is to hold an all-member briefing in June with a report subsequently to IJB board and to this subcommittee. Just to ask for an update in terms of where we are with that report and when can we expect it, because obviously it's a report we asked for a number of weeks ago and it's a very important report. So I don't know, Louise, are you able to update us on that?
Through yourself, convener, we've had contact with John O'Dow, who is the public health consultant who is writing the report for us a number of times in the last couple of weeks. We've had a number of different asks in relation to the report as well. John has come back to us and given us some reassurance that we'll have it for the middle of June for the all members briefing.
Okay. Any other questions on those paragraphs through to 5.15? Lynn, you got a question?
Yeah, just under 5.14, just about space and looking at the accommodation within the offices. If we get any idea of what percentage that's actually coming back, and is there any plans now that we're doing homework in? Have we identified any roles or staff members who can continue to work from home?
Okay. Gerald, do you want to pick that up?
Convener, I can't answer the question directly in terms of percentages, but I can confirm to the committee and to Councillor Quinn that officers from property services working with the health and safety colleagues have been around all of the main offices within the municipal buildings complex and will go to all, as we term it, operational facilities in order to mark out and provide the relative heads of service, the respective services and their corporate directors, an indication of the capacity, the maximum permissible capacity of each of the rooms within their various buildings. And I'm talking about the operational properties, offices, depots. A lot of work is being undertaken right now in terms of the educational establishments. So we're seeing a quite substantial revisal of the numbers of staff that are able to occupy offices. And we are engaging with the heads of service, the corporate directors, in order to ensure that the working elements, the different phases of return for different employees, depending on the requirements of the service, can be managed within those maximum capacities. It can be managed by the relevant heads of services and corporate directors when the time comes for the restoration of all services. So that's very much in line with the Scottish Government's phased approach, and that work has been undertaken in order to facilitate the plan for that, Convener.
Okay, you happy with that answer, Lynn?
Just a substance. I think I think the problem with the question is about we're looking at how many people we can fit back in, but actually it's about looking at whether they were working from home and there's a benefit of them working from home. So it's really about doing it from that point of view rather than making sure we just put the maximum back. Because if we've established that actually from working home it's a better work-life balance for our employees, is that something we should be looking at, which I think a lot of companies are now looking and seeing the benefit of home working, and are taking that approach.
Okay, I'll bring Stephen McNabb.
Okay, thanks, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Quinn. Yes, I absolutely agree. This is an opportunity for us to look at different ways of working, and obviously we've had quite a bit of an investment in our ICT side of things, and we've got a lot of people, as you say, now working from home for the first time, and certainly discussions at the corporate management team, we've realised that there are benefits to the way we're working at the moment in some areas. So certainly as part of each service's recovery plans, that will be one of the areas that we're looking at to see whether there is scope to have a more flexible working opportunities for our employees, and perhaps even more permanent home working arrangements. So it's definitely for consideration as part of our recovery plans, and we'll obviously be looking at our home working and flexible working policies around that as well to support anything. So it's definitely seen as an opportunity, Councillor Quinn, in terms of lessons learned from this. Yeah.
Okay, before I bring in Scott wants to give us an update in relation to the recycling centre. Maybe Gail can support that as well, and also the bins as well. Scott?
Thank you. If I cover the household waste recycling, so positive. Was operating successfully. We did have queues first thing tomorrow morning, quite extensive queues yesterday morning. It is now working reasonably well. Here can maybe update. We are holding back now on Curran Drive. We'll open it in a fortnight. It's more difficult for us to manage the traffic. We want to take the load first at Pottery Street, and then look to open Curran Drive in a managed way from the middle of June. I don't know if Gail wants to comment on operations today.
Gail?
Afternoon, Leader and Councillors. Yes, today we're finding that we've got a steady stream. We've had a few periods where it's been slightly busier and other periods, but at all times the traffic's been manageable. We've not had any conflict with any users. So to date, things are moving well, and we'll continue to monitor. We have daily conference calls with Transport Scotland and Police Scotland to ensure that we're managing the traffic in the area, to look at whether we need to do anything in addition, or look at any additional social media messaging as well. But we'll continue to monitor. We anticipate it may be busier again at the weekend, due to the fact that people may be working during the week, and that could be an opportunity for people to use the site. To that end, we have ensured that it's private cars only at the weekend and no trade users. So that should help to ensure that we're able to get the flow as much as possible and have that steady use without too much delay.
Okay, thanks, Gail. I know we had a useful members briefing on this, and I think the intention is to have another briefing just before or around about time Cairn Drive opens as well. So that'll be helpful. We can do that. Scott, do you want to come in on the blue bins?
Thank you, convener. Yes, the blue bins has been a challenge for us. The contractor that we have got has a very good contract with us in that the price they charge at £49 a tonne is below the industry average. The industry average is about £80 to £90 a tonne. So it's a contract we're precious about. The contractor initially indicated they could recommence in the middle of May. That didn't happen. We've unfortunately had to take a more legalistic position with the contractor. And as of today, we have agreed a minute of variation with the contractor, which will suspend the contract until the 7th of September. So from the 7th of September, our existing contractor will resume, but until then, we're putting in place a temporary contract to remove blue waste. I'm not going to give a deadline to the committee today on when that contract will start. We anticipate it will be somewhere towards the end of June, and at that point, a substitute temporary contractor will remove our blue waste and we'll recommence a full bin service. The benefit of that approach is that when the existing contractor re-engages in September, it will be at that original price of £49 a tonne. If we had not been able to do that, we would have faced an annual budget of around about £216,000 per year. But I'm happy to answer questions. I'm conscious there's a lot of detail in this, although I did cover a lot of these points at the WebEx briefing 2 weeks ago.
Question?
To answer questions, much to answer, convener. This report's a scrutiny report, so this is the issue I've got, and that we've just received quite substantial updates from the head of service and the director, and separating obviously the important issues, which is obviously the most important issue at the moment. The blue bin issue is clearly something that a lot of elected members are getting contacted regularly. So I would like to hope that that's actually appreciated and it should be included in the report, an update on that, because obviously now as representatives of groups we don't have a way to then go and communicate to our group the feedback we've just received from officers in advance of the committee, obviously. It obviously relates to point 50.
Sorry, just a minute.
No,
Chris, just let me point out, it is in the report.
Okay,
it is in the report.
So
there's an update in the report.
It relates to point 54, so I was going to ask that went to the CMD. I know that the Chief Executive had obviously gave us that undertaking when we established this committee, that any reports that went to the CMD, wanted to see them, they could see them. So I'd like to see that. But the point being obviously the timing, and that an update was asked at the last committee on this issue, and we were told that there was further talks on the report that was able to go to the CMT. So a specific question for Mr. The contract to the 7th of September. When we had been asked these questions, what was going on upwards and out. Deliver the service. The issue was the removal. I think it was about a portal as required, so it's to get a contractor in place, and it's not going to take effectively a year.
I'm just getting some feedback here, Chris, that you're cutting out a bit when you're speaking. I don't know if you can move the microphone a bit closer to you. First of all, I'll bring the Chief Executive in. There's been a request about seeing the report that went to the CMT in this particular matter relating to item 54. Was that possible? Okay, Scott, did you get the question?
My apologies, but I'm hearing the chamber very clearly, but I'm not hearing what Councillor McAleer is saying. There seems to be a problem. The speech breaks up continuously. I think I know what the gist of the question is, and I can try to answer it. But if I have gaps, then my apologies.
Okay, you try and answer, and if there's any further points, Chris can come back in.
Thank you, Convener. I think the key issue is what was the situation back in May when we reported on this, and as soon as contractor had difficulty, and that was on, I think, from memory, the 20th of March, we immediately did a soft market test to see what a substitute contractor cost would look like. We've always had the capability to put a contractor in at very short notice, within 2 weeks, and that has always been a fallback position to us. But the contractor was making promises that they could restore their service, and given their service is at a very competitive price, that's an attractive thing for the council. As it turned out, the contractors not been able to restore their service, and this is not unusual. During COVID, we are finding that promises are made which can't be delivered. In these circumstances, the options we have are either to negotiate a legal suspension of the contract, or to actually serve notice that the contractor was in breach, essentially remove the contractor from the contract. We sought to avoid that so much as possible, because that would place the council at a considerable disadvantage and a cost pressure. The position we've now got to is a negotiated suspension of the contract, which is the best place to be, and avoids a cost of around about £210,000 a year. And we can also now appoint our temporary contractor to see us through to September. So I would advise that we have got a good outcome, although it has been frustrating. It's taken as many weeks as it did.
Okay, thanks. Happy with that answer?
I wouldn't say I'm happy with it, it's just a matter of fact. But I suppose it being that if we go back 6 weeks or to that position, based on the verbal updates, I would have assumed, considering we were also putting out press statements saying that the service was going to be reinstated ASAP. I would have assumed 6 weeks to a month ago, but by now the service would have been reinstated. So I would be disappointed if we get to the end of June to again be hearing that we're still in ongoing talks. So I would hope that it can be impressed upon officers that if a commitment there that the service will be reinstated by a ballpark figure of the end of June, I would like to see that happen.
Well, I mean, I don't think we need to impress it upon officers. I believe that officers have been working as best they can to get the service up and running as quickly as they can, and I'm sure they'll continue to do that. But the reality at the end of the day is there isn't a blank cheque here, and we'll obviously be coming into the financial report, and it's not as claimed in the Greenock Telegraph today about a cost-cutting exercise. It's actually about trying to deliver an effective service, but try to keep the extra costs that we're going to have to incur down as well. So I'm quite content that our officers are their very best, and that there is no being reinstate this. Okay, I think let's move to section 6.
From David. He's aware that the National Association of Councillors that in England, I understand, is 36% of have been affected by the COVID epidemic. Do we have the percentage? I think there's 14 care homes in Inverclyde. Obviously, I'm sure I may be corrected, but do we have a percentage of what care homes have been affected in Inverclyde? And I'm not aware, is the Scottish statistic also available?
Convener, before there's an answer, could it be checked that Councillor Quinn is back online and has had sound restored, please?
Yeah, it was actually half of what Graham said I lost, but I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Someone can tell me.
I think that people in the chambers will need to have their microphones, as I've got it, close to their mouth, basically. Well, I think potentially it's just people no consistently speaking into the microphone. Maybe about try to get that closer. So, in terms of the question, Louise, did you get that?
Apologies, I didn't pick it all up. I lost Councillor Brooks for the first half of it, but I think I picked up the essence, and maybe Councillor Brooks can come back. And I think what I was asked was, do we know how many care homes in Inverclyde have had an outbreak? And we do. However, the numbers are so small that it would be, because we've only got 14 care homes, that it would be easily to identify them. We do have national figures, and we're able to compare us through the National Registrar's information in relation to COVID deaths in care homes in comparison with other places.
Yeah, so you're confirming, Louise, then that we can't have a percentage of 14, we can't get a percentage and can identify them. I'm just surprised that percentage may identify a care home in Inverclyde.
I can give you the percentage, Councillor Brooks. I just can't give you the care homes because the numbers are relatively small. If you give me 2 minutes, I can work it out.
It's a question from Australia, so feel free to email me at an appropriate time. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on this section? I'll bring in Lynn first. Chris, if you could. Lynn's in first, Chris, and I'll bring in Lynn.
Yeah, just a few questions on testing. I think it's probably number 6 and 7 combined. Do we know how many, obviously we've got the army testing units, do we have an idea of the numbers there and whether that has been a success? Also, do we happen to know how many of our council employees, now that we've got access to testing, how many employees have been tested, and if the testing is now part of the sort of sickness absence procedures?
Okay, Stephen, do you want to give that a go?
Yes, thank you very much. As far as the testing unit, the mobile testing unit that we've got at the waterfront that's organised through the military, we've not been able to get any information or data in terms of the usage there and the volume that's going through, and they're not giving us any of that information. So it's difficult for me to say how successful or not successful it's been at this moment in time. What I can say is, in terms of the employees, we have only referred, what you see from the report, it's quoted as 5 employees have been referred through our health and safety team. It's up to about 8 now that have been referred. Now, all have come back, well, 6 have come back negative, and the other 2 are waiting results. So the numbers are very low that's actually being referred through our health and safety team. What I would say is, anybody, including our employees, can refer themselves for testing. So there may well be employees who have referred themselves through the website, the government website, and they may have gone for testing, but there's only a small number from the report that has been referred through ourselves. In terms of the attendance management, it's a very good point that you've raised, and it's something that we're working with managers and heads of service at the moment on. I mean, one of the areas of concern is obviously the number of employees who might be off at the moment in a self-isolation situation, where they're off for 7 days because they've got symptoms, or whereby they're maybe off for 14 days because a family member has got symptoms. These are the individuals that should be getting referred or referred themselves for a test immediately, so that if they are found to be negative, they can get back to work immediately. So we are building that into all our communications at the moment. We're emphasising it to managers. We're making sure managers are monitoring all those that are off at the moment in that situation, making sure that they're sending people for tests where appropriate. But given there is only a small window up to the initial 5 days of symptoms where the test would be of value. So to answer the question of Councillor Quinn, it is very much part of our attendance management side of things. We are pushing managers at the moment to make those that are off for 7 or 14 days that they are coming back to work when they should be coming back to work, or if a test is appropriate, that they're referred for a test. So yes, it's obviously an important part of getting people back to work, to answer Councillor Quinn's question, and we're communicating that as best we can to our employees and our managers to make sure that happens.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Chris, you want to come in?
Thank you, Convener. So it's just following on from the stream. So just testing in general, Louise. So there's basically, if I'm wrong, unless I'm wrong, there's 3 routes to testing now. So we've got Port Glasgow Health Centre, which tests for health and social care staff, and it's also the route via a GP referral for residents of care homes to be tested. We've got the UK government's drive-through facility, with the nearest one obviously being at Glasgow Airport. But the previous committee, we heard that only 2 members of staff had access to that. And I think anecdotally, not many people use that service. And the third one now obviously being the mobile unit. And I'm sure phase. So basically, everybody over the age of 5, over the age of 5 now, if they display the symptoms, should be going and getting a test so that we can test, protect, isolate, etc. So testing now is that mobile unit in Greenock, but those figures don't get shared with us or the health board. How do we have a grasp of the level of community transmission? Of that's probably going to be the main, if we're going to get at a stage, obviously there's been 600 people tested through the Port Glasgow Centre, which is our staff. But if Test and Protect's going to hit anywhere near the numbers that people say it's got to hit, so that we can use that as a strategy to move out of lockdown. So we're talking potentially thousands of people would have to filter through the mobile army unit. If those figures don't get shared with you or the health board, how do we actually understand what the local situation is? So is there any opportunity, or do you think there's any requirement for whether it's yourself, the chief executive or the leader, to actually raise that point with whoever responsible for the delivery of the service? It seems to be, Convener might know a bit more, seems to be a bit of a strange situation that it's a UK government mobile unit. It's their responsibility, but obviously the chief executive, after speaking to the health secretary, the cabinet secretary, seemed to be in a position that she could direct the mobile unit to come to Inverclyde. So perhaps she have the ability to request the data off of the unit.
But I mean, before I bring Stephen Alloy and Louise in, I mean, I know that you book a test for the mobile unit in the same way you book a test for the Glasgow. And I'm presuming the tests go similar places to be carried out, or the swabs, and then you get the same response, which is a text message telling you the outcome. So I'm a bit confused as you are as to why that data wouldn't be available. Stephen, do you want to come in, or Louise? Louise?
Apologies, I didn't hear all of Councillor McElhenney. The results go to, all the results go to the person by text message and their GP. What we're not able to do is the results from the UK and drive-through facilities don't go to public health, and it's through public health that we collect the data to be able to do things like the trace isolate and also to report in care homes and a whole range of reporting. So there is an issue in relation to reporting from the UK drive-through mobile testing units that public health are aware of. In fact, I was on a call today with the Director of Public Health, and she was talking about writing to them to ask them if we could change it so that we could get the test results as we're moving forward, and that was in respect of repeat testing.
I mean, I think on the back of that, it would be perfectly reasonable for us to ask the Chief Executive to.
Could I just maybe make a point first, Chief Executive? That's okay. I think obviously, as Louise has said there, surely the almost cataclysmic here is that someone's a positive test through the application, contact tracers don't contact the people they've been in contact with. And I was actually aware of that. I thought that there had just been a different route of contact tracers because the UK government's hired 20,000, but I would say that's got to be a major concern that we've been prompted, and quite rightly so, to use that facility, and now if they're a positive test, they don't then get contact traced, so there's potentially symptomatic people spreading the virus throughout our community.
I mean, I think that's a perfectly fair challenge, Chief Executive Wickman.
I'm not aware, Commissioner, of the detail of how anybody that's found positive by the Army unit or indeed any other unit, and how that's referred to the contact tracing system in Scotland or indeed south of the border. I am aware that around about the highest throughput of tests that were undertaken was around about 47 over the period, and the lowest was around about 12 over from what my understanding is. And the capacity of the test unit is something like 300. So we could ask, certainly I'm happy to write, Commissioner, if that's what the committee wishes me to do, to seek clarity about what happens when a test comes through and whether we can get more information in terms of how that's dealt with.
Thanks, Chief Executive. I think just a final point, Convener, is that this figure will be out of date, but it's somewhere in the region of about 340 positive cases there's been in Inverclyde, contrasted to the death figure, which is about a third of that. So I think we can, in Inverclyde, we don't have a third of people that have the virus are dying from it. So there's obviously a much greater amount of people have had the virus. So the figures you say there, 47 being the highest figure, if test and protect going to work, that's got to be driven majorly high. Obviously, I think if we don't actually get that contact tracing carried out, so I'd be keen for you to.
Still struggling to hear you, Chris, but I think again that's a fair point, because we know from the national figures that the reported number of sort of cases is significantly less than the actual number of cases. So I think it's a fair challenge. So I think it's about deciding, and we'll leave it to the Chief Executive, deciding the appropriate person, whether it's at official level or ministerial level, to raise the matter with, to try and get an answer to that question, because obviously test and protect is absolutely crucial to managing and keeping control of this virus.
Could I just mention, Councillor McElhenney mentioned that I'd spoken to the Cabinet Secretary. I haven't done this yet because the meeting hasn't been arranged. Date for the 19th of June. Or written to them, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, you wrote and you get contact back in terms of trying to arrange a meeting, but it's been difficult to try and agree a date. Okay, any other questions in the testing section? No. Okay, moving on to section 7, the workforce issues. Anybody get any questions on that? No. Okay, that takes us just on to the appendix. So quickly run through the appendix or appendices. So 54, 55, 56, 57A, 56, Chris.
I was looking for a bit of clarity on 56 because, well, first point being on Anderson Bay, so not going into rights and wrongs of whether there should be hundreds of people down there, but the fact of the matter is that they are. So there's been a lot of questions about
Apologies.
I was under the responsible for at Lunderson Bay because Lunderson Bay is part of Clydemere Shield Park. So I was just wondering why then, as a council, we have responsibility for the car park at Lunderson Bay. And the other point is that the report says that implementation was to be on a date determined subject to Scottish Government guidance, but the Scottish Government never actually issued any guidance. But in a verbal update at the daily briefing, the First Minister said that any car parks that had been closed, she would suggest, again, it's not the best way to advise people is by suggesting verbally, but she suggested that car parks should remain closed. Whereas in Inverclyde, we've obviously seen, I think the Battery Park car parks opened again, Lunderson Bay car parks obviously opened, and the Green Park car parks are open. Perhaps clarity on why we took the decision to reopen parks, and if someone could just exactly the relationship between Clydemere Shield Park and Inverclyde Council in terms of the management of waste and car parking at Lunderson Bay.
The First Minister did rather confuse matters somewhat. Scott will come in and respond in those points.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, when the First Minister made her speech on the Thursday, we in parallel got a directive that said that we should be keeping all car parks closed that went to all chief executives. And at that position, which would be about 12:30, the view was the car parks would remain shut. We got a further communication from Scottish Government about, I think about 2 o'clock from memory, that amended that position. So the advice at that was that subject to discussion with the local police. And I think the reason for that was there was a recognition that some places would have significant challenges if car parks were left shut and cars parked on roadways and such like. So we consulted with Police Scotland, and based on that, we did a soft opening of our car parks. So we didn't publicise it. We opened the car park at Lunderson Bay, at Cut, and also the park in Europe. And that was a situation through the weekend. I think Argyll and Bute did the same in some locations as well. In terms of the role that we play in the Clydemere Shield car parks, we look after them and maintain them, so they are the council's assets. So that it is for the council to determine what happens and how these locations are managed. So I'm happy to answer any more detail if you wish.
I was asking about those waste in terms of, obviously there's a lot of people down there and a lot of waste getting left.
Sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing. Could you repeat that, please?
Councillor, obviously we're sort of controlling the car park, but people who are using Lunderson Bay are obviously sort of litter behind or about.
Yes, at this stage it would be for the council to clear that up as best we can with our available resources.
On 57. Okay. Okay, that takes us on to item 3. Alan.
Thank you, Convener. Hopefully everybody can hear. I must admit I'm struggling to hear quite a lot of what's been said in the chambers at the moment. The financial update covers quite a number of issues, and probably the if I just go through the appendices. Officers are continuing to capture the extra costs associated with COVID. Obviously, that involves a degree of estimation from both an HSCP and the other council services perspective. Appendix 1 gives the latest position with a net cost of £3.5 million for the general fund, and that's on the basis that all the HSCP costs will be met by the Scottish Government, for which there's been an initial payment of £785,000. Appendix 2 is a letter received last week from the Finance Secretary highlighting both the council share of the 155 million consequentials money, but also the lack of future resources to support the significant expenditure that council still expect to incur over coming months. And in light of recommended that officers bring back a report to the August P&R committee with proposals for how the estimated net funding is met, because it's important that the members take a view on that before we start allocating resources elsewhere for other things. Appendix 3 gives an update in respect of where the various funding streams allocated from the Scottish Government are funded. And how the council is utilising that funding and any emerging issue. 4 updates all payments to providers where the service delivery has been adversely impacted by COVID, and specifically Section 6 seeks committee approval in relation to the payments to school transport providers. Finally, whilst closing the year-end accounts, so a large underspend in the early learning year specific grant has been identified. It's proposed to bring a more detailed update on this to the next committee, as well as part of an outstanding in relation to the delivery of the 1 month 40 hours. So that'll be a report from Ruth and myself. I'm happy to answer any questions, and apologies if you didn't get all that. I'm happy to repeat anything.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions. I do have a specific proposal to put to the committee, but I'll open it up for questions first. So, Councillor Brooks wants to come in. Gail.
Thanks, Convener. 4 points consequentials have came across. 2.3 million is a good fund, and we can obviously see what's happened to it. My question for 5.3 is for scrutiny and transparency. Will the businesses that receive the grant, will that be available for elected members either in a private document or in a public document?
Okay, Alan, did you get that?
I think it was the 2 million. Sorry, Councillor Brooks, was there a specific question? I didn't get the start of what you were saying.
A specific question at 5.3 on the business grants. Will the members be able to see what businesses were successful in those grants from a point of scrutiny?
Yeah, 4.2, Alan, was just him giving a wee bit of praise to the UK government. That was all it was.
The Scottish Government passed it on. It was the Scottish Government that passed it on.
Right, Alan.
Thank you through you, Convener. 5.3, yes, the plan would be that we issue within the realms of GDPR, though there'll be certain bits of information we cannot give. The plan is that by the end of next week, we will have a list. Now, at the moment, we have paid out over 800 grants, and obviously that list changes on a daily basis. We are getting a number of freedom of information requests regarding businesses paid as well, but as always I would take Gerard's services advice as to what I can and cannot print. Unfortunately, again, we got notified at lunchtime about fraud scams from people who are using this information and then turning it back on you with fraudulent claims as well. So we've just got to be very careful about what we publish, but I'm happy to say that we will be supplying all members with a list, or we can even put it on the website and that'll deal with the FOIs as well, but I'd take Gerard's advice on that.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor McElhenney, and then Councillor Quinn.
Welcome the last point, obviously, because I was under the impression that was an outstanding remit, because I asked the same question at the last committee, and the answer was that it's a Scottish Government scheme, so we would need permission of the Scottish Government to release that information. Is that no longer the case? Would be the first question. Second question, conveners, on item 6.
Okay, do you want to ask that question? We can take 2 questions.
Yeah, so the 60%, the body of the report says that although the financial information was provided from the companies, it made analysis quite difficult. So was the 60% really just a guess in what would be a fair payment and what officers thought members would agree to? Or was there a different rationale for how officers came to the 60% figure?
Okay, Alan, so 2 questions there, one in terms of business grants and the other in terms of transport providers.
The point in business grants, no, I approached the Scottish Government and they copied in a response to all 32 councils that they had no difficulty with sharing the information, but it was down to them to determine in terms of GDPR what information they were to release. So the Scottish Government officials have come back and said it's okay to release the information. In terms of the 60%, members will appreciate the diverse nature of the companies that provide school transport. There are some for whom school transport makes up well over half their income. There are some for which it makes up, I think the lowest case I had was under 5%. So the impact of COVID on their income streams is not just around school transport, it's around all the other income that they normally get. So if we're looking at what is the funding level that's needed to meet the marginal costs that the business, or the fixed costs, sorry, that the business is still incurring round about school transport contracts, there'll be a far smaller impact on that company that has 5% of the turnover from school transport rather than one that has 60 to 70% of their income from school transport, if that makes sense. But to get a consistent amount awarded to each company, which is what we've done with other areas like early years with care homes, etc., or home care, you need to take a best average, and that came out at 60%. It certainly wasn't done on the basis of doing what would keep members happy. It's a case of saying what's the best use of the public pound, and in the calculations that I did build an element of profit in for these companies as well.
Okay, Lynn, you want to come in on that particular matter?
Yeah, so I've got a question from Tommy as well, so bear with me, don't shoot the messenger. So Tommy's saying, wouldn't it be prudent for the council to plan on the basis that we're getting no further ring fence funding, and bring back to the subcommittee in the next couple of months a plan on how we're going to meet those net costs? He also wants us to go back over exploring a deferment on the PPP payments as well. So a general question, and I've got a question on the transport as well. Is one of our contractors, but you mentioned home care providers and daycare. We've also got the Beacon and Inverclyde Leisure, and also community centres, which are all partners as well. So what percentage cut are they taking? Are they all 100%, or are they all being round about the 60% as well?
You want to pick those questions up?
Thank you. The first point that Councillor McVeigh's conveyed to Councillor Quinn, that's covered recommendation 3.1. That's my plan, is to report that back, because I think the prudent thing is to come back on the basis that there's no more money coming. I think there's more costs coming as well, so we might get more money, but it might be more than cancelled out by the extra costs, particularly in relation to delivering the new school model when they come back in. In terms of PPP, if I can refer to Jared regarding that, because he's explained to subcommittee before, but if I can pass that on to Jared. And as far as the final point, that's covered in Appendix 3. The payments that we are making, if you look at Inverclyde Leisure and the Beacon, for which the council has specific arrangements with, we have agreed to give 100% funding. For home care, it was to give them slightly more so they could continue to deliver a service while suffering sickness. They wouldn't be able to deliver. I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback and echo back from I'm hearing myself, which is not always the best thing. is that they would be suffering sickness levels, which mean they wouldn't be able to deliver the same level of service, so they'd be getting a cut, which would make them unsustainable. So we're giving more than 100%. And in other cases, we're not paying businesses anything. We're not delivering because we're not ordering things, because we're not got staff in the offices. So there's some businesses who are getting nothing. There's some that we're giving 100% to, and there's some that we're giving between nothing and 100%.
Okay, Gerald, do you want to come in on the PPP?
Convener, on two previous occasions with the scrutinised, the first that happened, Convener, and I'm quite happy to take Councillor McVeigh, Councillor Quinn through the actual previous meeting of the Exec Subcommittee. We're following, as a council, the Scottish Government guidance on this matter, and the guidance is very clear in that what we should be doing is paying for services that are being rendered to the council. This is mindful of the fact that the payments through the PPP are divided between the servicing of the debt, and they are significant figures, of course, and the actual payments for services. As it happens with Ruth's programme of childcare hubs, we've sought to include the PPP schools in that in order to maintain services and thereby ensure that the council and the Education Authority continues to get value. There is cleaning, in fact, one would have to say more cleaning required in those PPP schools, and we are satisfied that there is no reason, no rationale as yet to issue any form of contractual notice to order the payment for the services that the council gets through the PPP arrangement. It's a very formal arrangement. We have not approached that threshold, and as you know, Convener, I gave the undertaking that officers will continue to monitor that, and if that's good, there is no basis for this whatsoever, because we have looked at this to issue any form of notification to the contract. So we are mindful of this as an issue, and in the future, I think you might well be receiving a report from Ruth in terms of the future schools, in terms of provision of childcare over the next period, Convener. There's no justification at this stage, as we see it, for seeking to reduce those payments, but we will bring that forward if needs be.
We've just got declaration of interest from Robertson in relation to the Beacon, and I'm presuming, Jim, are you still on the board of the Beacon? Yep, you'll declare as well. Okay, any other specific questions that people want to ask? Don't see any. Okay, can I come in paragraph 2.4, which relates to the food insecurity? We've obviously utilising Scottish Government funding. We're currently paying, I think it's in the region of 3,300 payments every fortnight to families who are entitled to free school meals, and this is an issue certainly that's been raised at a national level, but as it stands at this point in time, there is no guarantee that that funding will be extended beyond the end of June. I think that's an issue, and I think we need to be looking at that and to see whether we as a council, irrespective of whether the government comes up with the money or not, can potentially sustain that. So I'd like to see a report back to the next meeting on that in terms of the implications of that, the cost of it. Obviously, I'm assuming the practicalities would be relatively straightforward because we're already doing it. I'm conscious, obviously, also of the later discussion we may be having. There is a desire on the part of the members to look at the whole issue of poverty and how we support families over this time, given that more families are going to be experiencing poverty as a result of COVID-19. So I do think there is a wider piece of work, and I might tie in obviously the SNP group's view on the child payment. I mean, I don't think a detailed piece of work in that is possible for the next meeting. I think if we aim for the August PNR in terms of the overall approach to supporting families, but I think there is an immediacy in terms of addressing the particular issue around supporting families with meals over the summer period. So I'd ask that we agree a report coming to the next meeting on that specific issue, but also a wider report coming to the August PNR on the wider issue of poverty and how we can support families at this very difficult time within the resources that are available to us. Okay, we agreed on that? Okay. Sorry? Yeah. No, well, I'm going to go on to all the recommendations, okay? So that is on to, obviously, the recommendations. So we've got 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, and the additional request. So is anybody not in agreement with the recommendations? Okay, Councillor Quinn, are you moving a proposal under 3.3?
Yeah, under 3.3, obviously going from 100% to 60% seems quite a steep decrease. Bearing in mind a lot of these contractors that are actually local, who employ a number of drivers locally, and obviously the big concern about the economy locally. Also, there is still a bit of uncertainty of what bus travel looks like from August onwards. So we're relying on these companies with a bit of flexibility. They'll have a lot of their buses to adapt in terms of screening and procedures and training of staff on how the kids go on and off the bus. So I think that they will actually incur some expense there. So I would propose an 80%. Instead of the 60%.
Convener, I think you're on mute at the moment.
So Alan, what if we all went on to using the computer and stop using the microphone in the chamber. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yep. Okay. As I was saying, okay, so I probably just have to start again. So in terms of school transport, there is a far bigger issue than 60% versus 80%. Basically, we need a detailed report on the implications of returning to school on school transport, because we know that with physical distancing, far fewer young people are going to go on the buses, existing number of buses. So we're going to have to look at sourcing more buses. Well, we're going to have to look at it, the practicalities of sourcing more buses, or how we get, and the sustainability of the existing provider. So there's a far bigger issue in terms of going forward on that we need a detailed report on the implications. We're going to be discussing a report later on in the agenda in relation to cleaning and the significant cost of that. We've already discussed or agreed earlier on the agenda to allocate £100,000 for property costs as well. So there is a bigger issue in terms of school transport that needs to be addressed. So as I understand it, in terms of the existing contracts up to the end of June, our officers have looked at the fact that companies can access the furlough scheme, which means those staff who are furloughed, they can get 80% of their wages paid by the UK government. There also are other supports available to businesses depending on whether they own their properties or not. But also the fact is that a lot of their costs are not being incurred, so the principal one being fuel. So advice we're certainly getting from officers is that the 60% actually could be lower, could have been lower, if they were strictly looking at how much the income they were getting from other sources vis-a-vis how much they required from the council to fund their ongoing costs. So I think 60% is a reasonable figure, but I accept there is a bigger issue that we need to look at. Okay, Chris, you want to come in?
I was just going to point out, but also ask Ruth Banks, what you're describing to me would just come under the bracket recovery, and we've obviously got a recovery group set up with a subgroup on that. So I would assume that Ruth Banks would be feeding into the education recovery plan issues such as how do we get kids back and forwards to school, without the need for us then to create another stream of work for a standalone report on that. And obviously later on in the agenda we're talking about a member sounding board on that.
No, I'm not asking for that. I'm not asking for a separate report, and we've got a report on the schools reopening, right? But we're at fairly early stages in developing, in a sense, the plans and putting the meat onto the bones. And I would expect that once there's clarity around school transport, I would expect there may be a report, whether it's part of a further report on the schools reopening or a separate report. I would imagine it'd be part of a further report which will seek to address the issue of how we can provide school transport in the current climate. Ruth, do you want to come in on that? You're on mute, Ruth.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, we're looking at all of that, and it's very, very complex, and it will depend on the patterns that are opening for schools, so that we're in a bit of a chicken and egg situation at the moment. But as part of the recovery plan, and as we know the models that we're looking at and the plans to schools, we will of course bring something back about transport and all the resources, including meals as well.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, so can we agree all the recommendations except 3.3? Yep. Okay, so in 3.3, I'm moving the recommendations in the report, and Councillor Quinn's moving the figure be 80%. Gerard?
Convener, we have a motion, as you've just said there, 60% per the recommendation, and an amendment from Councillor Quinn for 80%. We'll do a roll call vote, Convener. I will say motion or amendment. It is your motion, Convener. It is Councillor Quinn's amendment. Roll call vote is Councillor Brooks, motion or amendment. Councillor Clougherty, motion or amendment.
Motion.
Councillor McCabe.
Motion.
Councillor McElhenney. Amendment. Councillor Quinn. Will be amendment. Amendment. And Councillor Robertson.
Amendment.
Amendment. Convener, we have 3 votes for the motion, 3 votes for the amendment. It is a casting vote within the terms of standing orders.
Okay, I'll cast a standing vote in favour of the motion.
Of the motion, I declare the motion carried upon the casting vote.
Okay. Moving on, that takes us on to item 4, COVID-19 Shielding Humanitarian Assistance Centre. I think Martin going to speak to that.
Thank you, Convener. This is just a report to advise committee on some of the work that's been done to support the shielding and other high-risk groups in the course of the pandemic. So effectively, we have a number of groups who have been advised that they are at higher risk, principally the shielding group, and there's details on what we have done to support the shielding group in section 5 of the report. There's a second far larger cohort of people known as the non-shielding at risk group. So that's effectively everyone who is over 70 or qualifies for a flu jab, in brief. And there's details of what has been done for them in section 6 of the report. There is an additional helpline for the other vulnerable people who maybe do not qualify on health grounds at the request of this committee. And that's also covered in section 6. And finally, there's a section 7 covering the implications of the Test and Protect strand and what that means for the Humanitarian Assistance Centre. So if I can maybe briefly touch on a few of the high-level issues that are highlighted in the report. First of all, in section 5.1, you'll see there has been some media coverage about this report, particularly about the fact that there was to be a potentially extended period of shielding. Now, that was based on comments from Scottish Government about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Subsequently, obviously, in the last week, we've seen a number of relaxations of controls for the shielding group, particularly in England and Wales. We haven't had an announcement in Scotland. However, regardless of the fact that down south has been advised that people can go out, they're still unable to visit shops, etc. So there will still be a requirement for some support. What shape that takes and for how long, though, is still slightly up in the air. Section 5.2 details some of the issues we've had with contacting people on the shielding list. And I can give committee an update. Out of a current total of 3,007 people shielding, we have contacted directly and spoken to 2,858 or 95%. And of the 149 people we have not yet spoken to, we know that we have some updated contact details for 73 of them from cross-checking with other systems, and we'll be writing to them or phoning them on the updated contact numbers or addresses we have. We have 49 who have been in contact with health or social work in 2020, so we know that there has been some contact there. So we do have a small number of 27 who we have got no contact with, and we suspect that they may be elsewhere. We know for a fact that we have some people who are maybe staying in with relatives. We know we have at least one who is in, I think, Italy. I think there might be one who's in Canada. So although we have a group that we've not contacted, for a lot of them, there's very good reason for that. But we are continuing to chase this down until we're absolutely sure that we have contacted everyone we can. Section 5.3 covers the process map for those who are shielding, and it's attached at Appendix 2. This is very much a live document and changes as we go on and as we develop new processes, as we have new requests from people that we need to actually put a process in place. And you'll see from it, it's quite a complex document and will only become more so as we go on. Section 5.4 details some of the challenges we've had. Primarily, we have had a challenge with delivery of food boxes from the national delivery system. That, I would have to report, has improved greatly over the last week. So since this report was written, both the Scottish Government has arranged a delivery of food boxes direct to us, which we were struggling to get arranged. And also we have not had the same level of failed deliveries as we had previously. Section 6 of the report covers the national helpline, the Inverclyde helpline. I think probably you'll see that there's a chart in Section 6 covering the helpline calls to the Inverclyde hack from the national helpline, and you'll see that that has kind of declined to a general level of between 0 and 5 a day. So it's really now quite a small demand, whereas initially it was quite a bit higher. Section 7 covers test and protect, and we're expecting that for a small number of people told to isolate at home, that some of the processes that we have on the process map will be needed to support a small number of these people. We don't know the level of that demand yet, and probably the biggest demand might be if we're required to provide accommodation for people. Obviously, being a stock transfer authority, we don't have lots of ready-to-go accommodation that we can use. I think depending on the demand, we'll obviously have to discuss this with the Health Board as and when the issue arises. That's likely to arise where people find it extremely difficult in their current living arrangements to actually isolate from the rest of the household. That's probably about it. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Okay, as Councillor McElhenney said, Martin, it's not that you're happy, it's your duty to take questions. So Councillor Brooks is going to ask
I hope
first set of
Mr.
questions.
Allen knew that was a joke.
Of course officers knew it was a joke, yeah.
Thanks very much, Convener. Actually, one of my questions has been fantastically covered, so 4.5 has gone. It's great to see that the Scottish food delivery is happening, that's fine. I had a lot of contacts regarding the shielding at 5.1. Obviously, as Martin has said, there's had press coverage. So I just wondered, do we have a strategy to, after this meeting, to actually re-engage with the press? Because a lot of people were very concerned when they read that they were having to stay in not for 18 weeks, but for 12 months. Some seniors had a bit of a challenge in communicating with me. So I just wonder if we can, Martin has clarified where that came from, but do we have a strategy to take it forward? And finally, maybe for Alan at 9.1, the consequentials for the test and trace from the English councils. They have got, was it 300 million, the report says. Consequentials should come through the Barnett formula. At time of writing of the report, you said you didn't have the information. Is there an update on 9.1?
Okay, Martin, first of all.
I'll be very happy to answer that question. First of all, the need for support for up to a year, I suppose, doesn't necessarily mean that that people on the shielding list have to remain in total isolation for up to a year. But the Scottish Government had indicated that there would be a need for a level of support for that period. I think probably given the press interest, however, that it will be worth putting a message out. And I know we have actually answered some questions to the Telegraph, particularly on the food deliveries as well today. So I would be happy to discuss that with corporate communications and we'll get a message out. The difficulty is we don't really know right at this moment what the likely shape is. I'm hoping that we will find some more tomorrow. we have a weekly catch-up conversation with the Scottish Government for the authorities in the west of Scotland, and I'm hoping that we may get some clarity there, particularly given what's going on down south and in Wales, what the Scottish Government's thinking is on this. In terms of 9.1 and the extra costs, we haven't heard anything as yet. I think that there's a UK government award to English councils to support test, trace, isolate and support. We haven't, I'm not aware that we've received anything or any indication of anything at this stage, but possibly Alan will be able to come in on that.
Okay, Alan.
Thank you. No, I've heard absolutely nothing on that, and it may be that the model of delivery in England is slightly different from the model of delivery in Scotland, but there's been no mention by COSLA of any funding coming to councils.
Okay, Chris first and then Lynn.
Thank you, Convener. I still find the whole concept of shielding the greatest paradox of the current crisis, because the UK is the only place in the world doing it. But at the same time, we've had some of the worst mortality rates amongst the shielding category compared to other countries. So I've never quite been able to balance those two. So I'm just curious as to how some of the policy initiatives are going to match up to human behaviour, because when the Cabinet Secretary was asked, for example, people that are finding it really difficult to isolate within their own home, there would be alternative accommodation provided. So if they live in Glasgow city centre, there's maybe something like 10,000 empty hotel rooms at the moment. If they live in Greenock, there's not that amount of empty hotel rooms. So is the human behaviour of someone going to be, well, I'll go and live in isolation and avoid property or a hotel room away from my family? Is that a realistic prospect that officers think anyone's going to actually take up? I'm not quite sure if they would. So I'm just wondering what sort of support we think would be in place. Not just people that live with other people, but if we're going to ask people to keep shielding when they're now looking at the world, shouldn't they be moving on? But it effectively is moving on. The news every night's people at the beach and people playing golf. Bowling clubs in Inverclyde are opening back up again. And I know that a lot of the bowling clubs have already introduced a policy that people over the age of 70 aren't allowed to attend, because they've took a broad brush approach that over 70 you must be shielding, but you could be 72 and very fit and able. So there's a mental health report later on that Louise is produced. So I think I'm still quite concerned that we've got a sizable group of our community that what we're trying to do to protect them from coronavirus could have quite profound impacts on the quality of their life. And particularly when and I don't like referring to people's statistics, but some of the statistics show that many of the people that have sadly died that are older, perhaps their life expectancy would have been only 1 to 2 years anyway. So I'm quite concerned that the quality of life or the end of life of a lot of people could be that shielding isn't really what any of us, I think, would want to see what elderly citizens have to do for perhaps the next 6 months, a year, or who knows how longer. And I think there's got to be a way that is part of a recovery plan. And I'm not going to fixate on bowling, but it would be pretty simple to say that, well, we could clearly have opportunities that people that are of a certain age are able to come out of their house, and they should be entitled to a wee bit of leisure activity as well, and we can make the environment safe for them. Whereas at the moment, it must be, obviously I know a lot of constituents in Gourock, as Councillor Quinn will know, are keen bowlers, so a lot of these people are finding it mentally quite difficult at the moment that they can't actually engage with the friends that they've built up over 40 and 50 years. So although the officers are putting in a lot of hard work, I still feel the reality on the ground is, of government guidance is, people are almost scared to challenge shielding because it would be politically dangerous for somebody to say, I think people in shielding categories should be allowed to go on with life. So bowling clubs, for example, just take the automatic position of, if you're over 70, you're not allowed to come to bowls. I don't know if the golf course is taking that position, but I think these are issues that we maybe need to get to the nitty-gritty of, because if someone that's in a shielding category is going to Tesco, which I know is happening because I see people all the time that are basically just getting on with life, it must be really difficult for other people that are sticking to what they perceive to be the rules. But is there then a trade-off that the shielding actually has a more negative effect on their quality of life than actually putting some measures in place that they can start to enjoy some of the creature comforts.
Who are we to question national strategy, but I suppose you just did it, Martin. I don't know if you can deal with that question or not.
Through you, Convener. Not in any great detail, because effectively, as you've said, it's a question of national government guidance. What I suppose is probably worth pointing out is that it is guidance. It's not an order that people must not leave their houses. It's guidance that they are very strongly advised not to, and then the support put in place to actually help them in complying with that guidance. I think it was recognised very early on in the outbreak, certainly that there would be certain groups of people for who might choose not to follow that guidance. And I think at the time it was identified that people who had maybe been given a very limited life expectancy might choose not to stay indoors for the rest of their lives, but might actually want to go outside regardless. And I think that was recognised way back at the beginning of this. However, one can only assume that the guidance is based on the best scientific advice that these people are at extremely high risk should they come into contact with the disease. The relaxation down south is very much in terms of people being allowed to go outside and exercise in the way I suppose the rest of us have always been all the way through the lockdown, and that's a very limited relaxation. What I can say is that in terms of support for people who are shielding and for the non-shielding at risk people who feel that they should stay at home, psychological support is quite a big element of this, and probably is becoming more of an element as time goes on, whereas initially it was about access to food. I think a lot of that has been now resolved. The issues that are coming up now are probably more about psychological isolation.
Thanks for that, Martin. Lynn? Going 5%, Alan.
Thanks for that. Just on the discussion there, can I just clarify? So obviously you've got NHS definition of a shielder, which isn't necessarily somebody over 70. That's only somebody that's over 70 and got underlying health conditions. For example, my own mum is in her 70s. She's not on the shielding list. My mother-in-law has just gone through chemotherapy. She's on the shielding list, obviously. So can we just clarify that actually on this shielding list, it's not all over 70s, it's only those over 70 and have got an underlying health condition. But also, just my other question, sorry. So there was reports lately that some members of our community were phoning the national line and they were being told that they would get a call back and they didn't get that call back. So I'm just trying to understand what's the process there of phoning the national line. Does it automatically put you through to Inverclyde, or is there a gap? And how do we ensure that we are receiving all those that have actually phoned the national line?
Martin?
Okay, two things. Firstly, the actual shielding list is purely on clinical judgment. So the initial list was people with certain diseases or syndromes or conditions, and that's then been added to by both GPs and other clinicians. So it's whether you are on the shielding list is entirely at the behest of either your hospital clinician or your GP. The non-shielding at risk category is everybody over 70 plus people with other less serious underlying health conditions. So if you're on the shielding list, it's because you have got something that makes you extremely vulnerable to COVID-19. If you're on the non-shielding at risk group, it's because you are more vulnerable than average to COVID-19, if that helps. In terms of the National Helpline did have some issues at the outset, but it diverts directly to our officers in Inverclyde. Our officers are not there 24/7, and you'll see from the numbers of calls we're getting that wouldn't be justified. But out of hours, it will go to an answering machine and it will be picked up and we'll get back to people. So if you've got anyone who has been unable to get through, I would advise them, or for some reason they haven't got a call back that they were expecting, I would advise them to call the number again, and we should answer it and we will get back to them. But I can't say that it's impossible that there may not be 1 or 2 calls initially that didn't get through.
Okay, thanks for that. No further questions. Okay, we're asked to note the report. Can we agree that? Okay, that takes us on to item 5, which is a motion from Councillor Jackson. So I'm going to invite Councillor Jackson to speak to his motion, and Councillor Clockerty, if he wishes to as well.
Thanks, Stephen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Right. Firstly, I need to apologise. I know the motions are vague. I don't assume members would be aware that here in Scotland, the COVID-19 crisis has unfortunately forced the delay of the new Scottish Child payment, and the Scottish Government won't be taking applications for this payment until the end of 2020. The Cabinet Secretary herself has admitted she can't provide a timeline for these payments, which leaves many families in desperate need of help now. Now, because of this delay, many organisations such as Save the Children Scotland, Child Poverty Action Group, the Poverty Alliance, Barnardo's, and importantly, Scottish Women's payment support for families is needed urgently, and this is why they support this payment of £250. On a technical point, the recipients of this payment will be those who are eligible for the delayed payment and can be paid initially to those who receive the Best Start grant. Now, I understand that this council are looking at measures to use the Loan Poverty Fund to tackle poverty locally, so it's important we don't confuse this motion and any future recommendations we may come forward on how we use our own funds. This payment is strictly in response to the emergency situation families find themselves in now due to the pandemic and the delay of the Scottish Child payment. This £250 payment would unlikely be enough to mitigate against the financial difficulty families find themselves in just now. However, it would certainly help those facing difficulties until this child payment is ready to get passed. So I would hope you should consider the motion and support it.
Okay, thanks, Colin. Jim, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Just to support the motion, I think most people will agree with the comments. I think for us, and we've just said for yourself at the earlier point, we know that child poverty is going to increase markedly over this COVID-19 pandemic. And I think what we're actually saying with this motion here is to try and say, look, as a community, as a country, we've just got to try and mitigate as best as we can the poverty we know is going to be out there. And we know there's anecdotal evidence again locally about how our families are struggling. So really, in support of this motion, I think what we've got to say is, and the Scottish Government is say, look, yeah, families are struggling, please help.
Okay. Chris, you've indicated you've got an amendment.
Yes, thanks, Convener. And I took the opportunity to circulate the amendment to members of the committee in advance so that they would have enough time to see it, perhaps raise it with other groups, or in your own case, reject it within 10 minutes of receiving it, Convener.
I'm very effective, Chris.
Yes. So I think that I welcome Councillor Jackson's clarity there, because obviously I think it's very important that if we want to be taken seriously as a council, we need to make sure that when we make approaches to government, they're smart approaches and we're actually concise and asking what we're calling for, and what we're calling for is actually something that is a deliverable policy. So obviously initially we were going to be writing to the government asking for a new payment of £250 to every child and families in serious financial difficulty. And I know fine well there are families across Inverclyde in financial difficulty. We all speak to them every day, but there's just certainly no way to define that, what that actually means, if that was going to be the contents of a letter that we would be sending to the First Minister of Scotland. So obviously I produced an amendment, so I welcome that you've obviously taken the time to read the amendment and perhaps based on the amendment now think that there is a more suitable eligibility criteria for what you're asking for. Just one point though on the Best Start grant, and obviously as usual, happy for anyone to correct me. The Best Start grant, as far as I'm aware, hasn't been cancelled, and applications for that are currently open. So if you're an eligible family that should be starting Primary 1 in August of this year, so that means you would have been born in, Ruth Binks will be able to correct me, you'd have been born in March 2015 to February 2016, I think. So, yep, thanks for the correction. So that grant is there, so that's a £250 grant that I think it would be worthwhile to actually remind families in Inverclyde that they are eligible for that grant right now, if they come into the eligibility criteria. So they can get that £250, they can apply for that now and they can receive that in August. So I think it would be good actually to make sure that uptake is as close to 100% as possible for that grant. So on to the actual amendment. I think that the child payment is a game changer. I'm not aware of any political party that's opposed to it. I know that members of this council themselves welcome it. I know that the convener himself is a big fan of the Scottish Government's child payment, because it was obviously yourself that was the named person on COSLA's press release as the children and young persons spokesperson welcoming the policy, which I'm sure you were obviously engaged with Scottish Government ministers at the time when they were putting the plans together. I think that we have a situation at the moment that Councillor Jackson's correct, that there is obviously ongoing legacy issues of deprivation, further compounded with the fact that we have been the hardest hit place in Scotland, which is not something that we should be shouting about to brag about, but I think it's certainly something worth shouting about to actually make sure people pay attention, that we should be entitled to special support. And I think hell-mend any council leader or any other councillor in another part of Scotland that thinks that they would rather receive more money in exchange for being the council that's the most deprived in Scotland and the council with the highest mortality rate in Scotland. I think that's two unique circumstances that on their own merits. I think support would certainly be merited, but never mind the fact that we just happen to be both the most deprived and have the worst mortality rate. So I think the sentiments of what Councillor Jackson proposed are absolutely bang on, and I know that poverty and deprivation have basically been his raison d'etre since he was elected, and the issues that he's been championing. But I think that we as a local authority and as local politicians and local elected leaders, we do have a role to play ourselves in using our own resources and creating our own unique policies to tackle needs locally. And I think that the poverty fund that we created in the budget this year, which is £1 million of recurring spend, and I think that's a pot of money that the initial plan was to have a very broad brush approach to engaging with stakeholders, the alliance, etc., to see where that money should be spent. But I think due to COVID, we know that timetable is not going to happen now. So we shouldn't be sitting on a pot of money. That immediate crisis intervention can make an absolute difference to many, many people in Scotland. And just, sorry to raise a point of order, Councillor Clotterty, I think if you were in the meeting, it wouldn't be good etiquette to gesticulate at members, so perhaps when you're online, please refrain from doing so. So I think that the amendment is calling for something that is competent and it's deliverable. I think that a £10 a week payment absolutely would be a game changer to families in Scotland. And we've got the resources that we can implement that right now. And I've got no qualms at saying that that then puts the challenge directly to the government to realise that this is their own policy that cross-party has supported. It's their own policy, but we've taken the local decision to implement the policy now. And if they don't then want to answer that call by providing extra funding, then I think that's a political consequence they need to deal with. But the reality is we can put the money in place right now. So I wouldn't intend to read out the amendment because, as I said, I did circulate it to everyone. I'm not sure if Councillor Jackson received it because I had sent it to Councillor Clotterty and Councillor McCabe, and it was only at a later point I sent the amendment to Councillor Jackson. I think we've got the opportunity here to both achieve what you want, is that actually if you vote for the amendment, it's a matter of fact that you would be putting financial support into the pockets of deprived families right now instead of waiting for whatever feedback we get from the government. But I think we've got the opportunity to both locally lead on the issue by putting more money where our mouth is and supporting local families, but also staying true to what you're trying to propose in your motion, is that we highlight that this is an issue, this is a crisis, and we absolutely challenge the government to provide more support. We can do both of those things if we support the amendment, and I'd ask members to consider doing so.
Okay, Councillor Jackson's indicated he wanted to respond, but I'll let him sum up the debate. So I'll just come in. There's no water, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen.
Colin, I'll bring you back in. Right, I need to let other people come in first. I'll bring you in at the end. So maybe I could just comment first of all. I mean, I don't think actually we are a million miles apart. I mean, earlier in the meeting, we agreed to have a report coming in June, which would potentially look at us, from our own resources, sustaining payments of £12.50 per week or £25 per fortnight per child who's eligible for free school meals. Now, the cost of that over the summer period will be, I would imagine, several £100,000, right? So we've asked for a report on that. We've also agreed that there will be a fuller report on our response to poverty in general, child poverty in particular, and obviously the taking into account the implications of the COVID-19 crisis, which is going to lead to more families being in poverty. We've asked for a detailed report. What your amendment is asking us today to do is to commit that we can immediately implement a £10 payment, child payment in Inverclyde. Now, with all due respect, if the Scottish Government can't immediately implement that, I'm not so sure Inverclyde Council can immediately implement it. And you will be aware that the child payment was to be phased in, and initially it would only be children under the age of 6 who would qualify for the child payment, right? Now, you have to be able to identify those children. You have to have an eligibility criteria, etc., to go through a process to go through. Now, I'll read you an extract from a statement made by the ministers at the time that they unfortunately announced they were having to delay the phased implementation of the child payment. And it says, introducing the Scottish child payment will involve enormous effort. As with disability payments, we had been on time, if not indeed ahead of schedule. Applications would have opened in the autumn, if not before. However, this timescale is dependent on a major recruitment exercise which has now been paused. We simply cannot recruit and train the staff required, and it is not possible to say when we will be able to do so. I still hope we will see applications open for the Scottish child payment by the end of 2020, with payments made next year. However, I must be blunt and state that if COVID-19 is with us longer, then this may change again. Members can be assured we will do everything humanly possible to deliver this payment as soon as is practically achievable. Now, with all the resources, and we're not talking about a lack of political will, we're not talking about a lack of finance, we're talking about the practical implications or implementations of the policy. If the Scottish Government, with all the resources it's got at its disposal, the huge civil service that's got and its ability to recruit more people, if they can't implement their own policy, what makes you think that we can implement that policy immediately in Inverclyde and agree today to implement it without actually knowing the costs of implementing it? We don't know if we can actually afford it, because we don't know if it can be contained within the anti-poverty fund, because we don't know how many eligible children there will be. It could be a few hundred, who knows, more likely it's going to be thousands. And we don't know if we can implement that. You couldn't possibly agree this amendment today without having a detailed report from officers on the implications of it. You absolutely couldn't agree to it. And in terms of the motion's about a national campaign. It's about us endorsing a national campaign, albeit, yeah, we recognise there are poverty and financial hardship among families in Inverclyde, but it's about endorsing a national campaign led by the groups that are outlined in the paper, who are impressing on the Scottish Government the importance of addressing child poverty in the midst of this pandemic. So we would, if we agreed the recommendation, would be endorsing that national campaign. But I don't think the way to address the issue locally is to tag on an amendment to that, which in essence changes the substance of the motion without having actually understanding the detailed implications of agreeing to what's in the amendment. So I simply couldn't support the amendment. I've already in the meeting got agreement that we will have a detailed report in August, and I'm more than happy for that detailed report in August to look at the implications of implementing the child payment earlier than the Scottish Government. But I don't think there's any way in this world we should sit here today and agree to do that without having that detailed report. Okay. Anybody else want to come in? Councillor Robertson. Elizabeth.
Thanks,
Convener.
I would suggest that a difference in terms of us being able to do things rather than nationally is that we know our children and families, and that we maybe can be more agile in responding financially than the Scottish Government can, because they don't know our families by definition. They're at a completely different level, and we do. And so that would be what I would consider to be the difference. And I guess with the amendment, we've got an opportunity to do some proper mitigation with a proper fund that we've identified for anti-poverty measures without perpetuating an understandable national delay that we're not happy with, but we're also not happy to perpetuate it when we've got an opportunity not to, would be my tuppence worth.
Thanks very much, Convener. Yeah, I'm happy with the recommendation of the paper that Colin has put forward. And that was before, obviously, Councillor McElhinney's amendment came in. I was looking to actually see and understand where it came from. And the only comment I was actually going to make, because I say I do accept the paper, is that in Stephen McNabb's paper to Policy and Resources, the 24th of March, he quoted Elizabeth Fraser from the Scottish Government. And she has quoted very clearly that the SIMD statistics and the linking to child poverty indicators is not a good way to use the SIMD statistics. So just the one paragraph within 1.2 that links SIMD to the whole thing, Elizabeth Fraser from the Scottish Government has said these are questionable, and I just hope we don't use SIMD as a badge that we fly around too often. We should use a statistic very carefully. And although I agree with the motion forward, I just want to make the point that SIMD statistics should be used very carefully.
Okay, Lynn, you want to come in? We are in the midst of a political debate, so in a sense it's not really questions, but if you want to come in and contribute to the debate.
Yeah, I'll probably get more of a question while I'm involved in the debate. I mean, obviously, as a group of independents, we're all for anything that's actually going to help our local families that are in poverty. We're going to obviously try and stay out of the politics of it, because it looks as if it's kind of apples and oranges, but it's pretty much helping our children in Inverclyde, which we're all for. It's just, I'm just needing a wee bit of clarification, because the two of them in our eyes look pretty similar. It's about getting money to the people that need it. So what I'm trying to understand is, well, what's the qualifying criteria of both of those? I think I'm clear on Colin's, which would be any child who gets the Best Start grant, but I'm not sure if Chris is just talking about the under 6, or is he talking about up to 18 as well? And where is the money coming from? Obviously, Colin's coming from the Scottish Government, so now it's clear that Chris is actually talking about the council meeting that. Is there an option for the Scottish Government to meet it as and start this early, and not just taking the money from the council? So I don't know if both of them could clarify.
Oh, okay, I'll maybe ask Alan Puckering if he's got any information on the sort of eligibility criteria for the Best Start grant. I know what involved in politics, but just know the Best Start grant for the child payment.
It's in the amendment.
Yeah, we're talking, Chris, about implementing a policy, right? We need to understand what the national policy is.
Through you, Convener. I don't know the exact detail of the £10 a week and what the implications would be in Inverclyde. I think, as you've indicated, that would require a fair bit more work. The best analogy we've got is the 3,300 payments we're making every fortnight at £25, based on both the Scottish Government criteria, which was then enhanced in the previous budget round to increase the eligibility around free school meals and clothing grant. So that's the sort of numbers you're looking at between the age of 6 and 18 who attend school and qualify. Obviously, if you bring the sixes as well, based on Scottish Government figures, you're looking at about another 2/3 being added based on the figures that I've seen. So you'd maybe add another 2,000 onto that. So you're potentially looking at 5,000 payments at £10 a week. So that's 50,000 a week. That's just ballpark information and qualifying criteria.
Okay, so for those that are not very good with arithmetic, what is 50,000 a week in an annual recurring cost?
About 2.5, 2.6 million, roughly. That's just off the top of my head.
Okay. Any other member want to come in before I bring Councillor Jackson back in?
Yeah, just to answer your question directly, Councillor Quinn, the qualifying criteria that I was referring to is highlighted in the amendment. And if you just bear with me for 2 seconds, I'll tell you exactly. I think I did email it to you. The eligibility criteria would be households with children and in receipt of a qualifying benefit, universal credit, legacy benefits and/or pension credit. And I think that when I submitted that amendment, obviously Councillor Jackson's read that, and he's obviously then based his on the Best Start grant, which uses pretty much the same criteria to get the Best Start grant as you would to be applicable for the Scottish Child Payment.
But the Best Start grant is only eligible when you're starting school, and it's a one-off. It's not a recurring that covers 0 to 60. Okay, any other member? Before I bring Councillor Jackson in. Okay, Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Stephen. This is, this isn't political at all in any way, and I don't like suggesting it is. As Chris says, this £10 a week the Scottish Government are introducing is a game changer, and all the organisations are named. They all welcome it too. But what they recognise as well is this delay. And this is why I'm asking for this payment to be supported by the council. It's not a choice of one over the other. If we can support this motion and get the £250 payment as is called for by all these poverty groups, then as they say themselves, this £250 payment, it's not going to go anywhere near to cover the debts and the financial restrictions on these funds rather than poverty. Or if we just go for the £10 payment, that's not going to do it either. We need both, and understand we need both, but we should be looking at getting this payment up and running as soon as possible. The Best Start grant has been identified as the best means to get it out quickly. So it's not a choice of one over the other. So just in summary, I hope you can support it. If Women's Aid and all these other organisations think that this needs to be done, I'm willing to take their evidence and everything they apply and support this and hope this comes through.
Okay, so Councillor Clockerty, you're moving the motion, yep?
Yes, I'll move the motion.
Okay, and Councillor McElhinney's moved an amendment, so Gerard.
Thank you, Convener. And to clarify, the amendment is the deletion of paragraph 4 and the insertion of the words that Councillor McElhinney has circulated. Otherwise, 1, 2, 3 stand. So it's 1, 4. Convener, a roll call vote, please.
To clarify,
beg your pardon.
The text of the motion has been changed, though. Namely, the last paragraph. In the event that I'm hopeful the amendment wins, but in the event that it doesn't, the motion's going to be made a bit smarter with the incorporation of language that actually is deliverable, instead of just, I think I picked Councillor Jackson up saying that he was deleting the reference to every child and families in serious financial difficulty, and he was going to replace that with a more meaningful statement.
that assessed this was, I apologise for the lack of clarity. I just assumed that members would be keeping themselves up to date with the benefits which are going to be paid out and the delays to. So all I was doing was adding clarity. I'm standing by the motion as it stands.
Okay, and the purpose of the motion is for us to endorse the national campaign led by these other organisations who are already engaging with the Scottish Government. Simply be us writing to the Scottish Government says Inverclyde Council supports this particular initiative. Okay, Gerard.
Thank you for that clarification, members. The motion as it stands and the amendment with the deletion of paragraph 4 and the insertion of the words that Councillor McElhenney has circulated. A roll call vote, I will say motion or amendment. The motion is Councillor Clougherty's, the amendment is Councillor McElhenney's. Councillor Brooks.
Motion.
Councillor Clougherty.
Motion.
Councillor McCabe.
Motion.
Councillor McElhenney. Councillor Quinn.
Motion.
Councillor Robertson.
Amendment.
Convener, I declare the motion carried.
Okay, thanks, Gerard. Right, that takes us on to item 6, support to care homes COVID-19. Louise, are you going to speak to that?
Through yourself, Convener. The report outlines people will know because of the national news there has been an outbreak in older people care homes. The report outlines the work that's been undertaken in Inverclyde in relation to care homes. In section 4 to 4.7, it gives some background information, and then in section 4.8 to 4.12, it talks about the support that we've put in relation to care homes, and then finally I just talk about the current position. Just to pick out some of the highlights in relation to it. At the beginning of the pandemic, and it's been much publicised, all health and social care partnerships across the country were asked to submit a mobilisation plan. As part of our mobilisation plan, we bought 50 additional beds. Those additional beds were used to help to facilitate discharge from hospital. They were also used to, because at the time they thought we had a COVID outbreak in hospital. We also looked at whether we wouldn't have enough home support staff for people to go home safely. And also we were looking at sustainability in relation to our care homes. You'll see that those 50 beds that we bought, we agreed to buy them up until the middle of June, and now financial support in relation to care homes is being looked at across COSLA. It's also to give some reassurance, and from 4.11, you'll see that very early on in Inverclyde we realised that our care homes would need additional support. In particular, and the first meeting of the care home group was in the beginning of April, before all the national guidance came out, and it was about making sure that we had psychological support that was available to people who worked in care homes, because we don't have any of our own care homes, but the third and independent sector don't necessarily have access to the same type of psychological support as they do in local authorities and health and social care partnerships. We have put in a lot of support, a lot of training, webinars, we've had public health in. We've also got a guidance note that we've put out across every care home provider across GG&C. In 4.12, the government asked us to do some testing in relation to care homes, and it's just to confirm that for our 14 older people care homes, we have tested everybody. And we are currently working with public health about the surveillance in relation to that. And then on the 17th, and then re-announced on the 25th, the Cabinet Secretary issued guidance asking for a clinical oversight group from the directors of nursing. And we've been working with the directors of nursing and the directors of public health to set up a safety huddle, which happens on a daily basis. Just to give some reassurance, we were already in contact with every care home in Inverclyde on a daily basis and have been since the beginning of April. We now have a daily huddle. We also have a weekly meeting, and in addition to that, I chair the technical group for GG&C. In section 4.13 to 4.18, it gives a summary of where we are, and it picks up Councillor Brooks' question from last time in relation to the number of deaths we've had in care homes and how that compares in relation to last year. And And then finally, in section 5, it talks about some of the proposals that we've got at the moment to try and support care homes now and in the future. Happy to take any questions.
No, it's your duty to take questions. Sorry, right. That joke has run its course. Okay. No, it wasn't actually. Okay. Any questions? No. Okay. So you must have written a very comprehensive and clear report, Louise. But we obviously will be getting a further report, in particular on the impact of COVID-19, and I would imagine the public health report will touch on the challenges we've faced as well.
Just through yourself, Convener, I think we need to be really clear that although we've got put in a lot of support to care homes, we are still very worried about our care home sector, and we would want, and we continue to have daily calls, and we continue to have a call with every care home for older people, and I haven't extended that to other providers yet because I don't think we're necessarily out of the woods in relation to older people care homes, and so and we're happy to bring back another report because there'll be more work that we need to do in this area, particularly about sustainability in the future.
Yeah, I think that's sensible. I mean, this is obviously a national issue, but it's important we keep an oversight of this. So, thank you. Okay, so agree with the recommendation. Okay, that takes us on to item 7, Inverclyde Mental Health and Wellbeing Update. That follows on from a request that Chris made on behalf of the SNP group. So, again, is it yourself, Louise, it's going to...
Yeah, through yourself, Convener. Members had asked at a previous PNR executive sub for a summary of the mental health services and the mental health support that was being offered. The report outlines in section 5 really the community support from 5 to 5.7, and then 5.7, 5.8, 5.9 and 5 talk about the services that we're providing in Inverclyde, and just to give some reassurance that all the services have continued. We may have had to abide by social distancing, so we've had to change how we deliver services. We've had to what we're calling a blended approach, which is a mixture of technology, telephone contact and clinics and visits. So not huge numbers of visits, but more visits as we go through the recovery and we're starting to step up. And then finally, in section 5.10 and 5.11, it talks about some of the new initiatives, and I'm pleased to say that since I've written this report, I can confirm that DBI, Distress Brief Intervention, will be rolled out in Inverclyde on the 8th of June. And we have done some work in relation to suicide prevention, and we're asking every member of staff who's in the Health and Social Care Partnership and all of our third sector to do first aid mental health training as part of while people have been off. We've also been doing some work with our local carers about ensuring that there's the right support, mental health support to our carers groups. And finally, in 5.14, it's the strategic planning group. I've had the local mental health programme board, and just there was some feedback from police actually that we've bucked the trend in Inverclyde. The number of people who have been distressed is actually went down across the COVID period. And but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, I've just noted that Councillor Quinn had a question on the previous report, so if we hold questions on this report for a second, and Councillor Quinn, can you ask your report on the question on the previous report?
Yeah, thanks, Louise. I've just got a couple of questions. Obviously, I'm new to this meeting, so obviously my other colleagues have been taking part in previous discussions. I'm just trying to drill down the figures. So obviously, you said that the figures of April 19 compared to April this year was 22 versus 74, but it doesn't tell us how many of those 74 were actual COVID, because on the 2-month figure it said only 35 out of 120 were COVID. So that means there was an increase in deaths. So I'm just trying to establish, is it how many are COVID and how many are COVID linked, if you like, but not necessarily COVID. The other thing just to mention is about, obviously we're talking about additional support to our care homes. Are we getting enough funding from the Scottish Government to continue that? I mean, I'm a bit concerned that we're actually talking about getting volunteers to pretty much staff our care homes, which is a good thing that there's volunteers out there willing to do that, but should we be relying on volunteers? for our care sector.
Okay, Louise.
So just to answer the two questions. First question on deaths. At the time of writing the report, we've had 35 COVID deaths. We've had a number of what we call excess deaths. And what I was trying to show in 4.16 is the number of deaths we've had this year in comparison with last year. I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback, so I can hear myself, which is very disconcerting. And in relation to staffing, just to give some reassurance to Councillor Quinn, we have, between the Health Board and the Council, we have put some staffing in place so that if any care home, whether it be private or independent, requires additional staff, that the Council's bank or the NHS bank would come in and support them. And the care, I hope that provides more assurance. The care home meeting, which happens on a Wednesday with all 14 care homes, has got very positive feedback about the support it's had from the Health and Social Care Partnership, the Council and the NHS.
Okay, can we move on to the mental health and wellbeing report? Graham, thank you. Question, comment on that?
Thanks very much. Yeah, it was just a comment. So welcome the report, and it's good for the SNP Group Task Force. It's really important that mental health and wellbeing is looked after. And the only comment I was going to make, what I thought was missing, what I've been aware of, is RSLs have done the powerful work of ensuring their customers, as they are looked after, especially those who are shielding and those who are connected with the faith communities. Obviously, they are third sector, but those who are connected with the faith communities have tremendous support on their mental health and wellbeing throughout the crisis. So I just thought the RSLs and the faith communities were missing. Understand they're not part of us, but I just thought I would mention them because they've been a crucial part in our community.
Okay, Louise, you want to respond to that?
Just to the RSLs, well, actually River Clyde Homes are part of the local resilience management group for the HSCP, and so we have been supporting them in relation to PPE and psychological support and a whole range of things at the beginning of the pandemic. Less asks of us now, obviously, as the pandemic has progressed. And you're absolutely right. We are very, very lucky in Inverclyde, whether it be our faith communities or just our communities in general. There is a whole range of people that I couldn't possibly capture in this report in its totality, who provide a whole range of support to individuals.
Okay, Chris, and then Lynn.
Yes, thanks, Convener. Thanks very much for pulling the report together. It's quite useful in being able to go through the various topics just to see if there's anything as a member that we're missing myself. But one of the points I wanted to focus on was 5.11. As I said, the report's very much welcome, but I think one area that maybe didn't get touched upon was just what is the mental health impact financial insecurities having on people. And obviously suicide's a very difficult subject to talk about, but I know myself of 3 people personally, and I know of 5 through social media, all young men that have taken their lives in the last 2 months. Which doesn't quite match up with the statistics that I had seen through Mr. Puckrin. So perhaps there's a lag in obviously April figures then moving into May. So that was kind of the reason I had started getting, well, not that I started getting interested, that was the precursor to asking for the report to come forward. So it's welcome to see that work's obviously getting done in suicide prevention. But the reason that I raised the issue of financial insecurity is obviously that the suicides that I've witnessed are young men, and they're very difficult to establish the reasons, but they all seem to come from the same background of employment in terms of being self-employed people. And the issue I've got there is it seems that there is a crack in that the UK government, the Scottish government financial support they're providing is that they obviously initially didn't provide any support or clarity to people that were self-employed, and that caused massive anxiety in the community from people that didn't know they were going to get paid, and then they were told it would be 2 months to wait until June. But there's a minority, but not an insignificant amount of people that have received no funding at all because they were told in March to apply for universal credit, and then when the UK government established the scheme for people getting the £2,000 grant support if they didn't fall into the category that HMRC would contact them directly to give them the kind of self-employed furlough scheme. They were then told they weren't eligible for £2,000 because they had applied for universal credit. So the government told them to apply for universal credit, then creates a scheme for the people that fall into the cracks, and those people aren't eligible for the scheme because they did exactly what the government told them to do. So I know that this has been, I don't know if it was raised at leaders, but I know it's been at COSLA level. I know that Citizens Advice Scotland are carrying out advocacy work, but I'm still getting contacted, but as I say, not a massive amount of people, but not an insignificant number that are under unbelievable pressure financially, which I'm concerned about the impact that's having on their mental health, simply because of what seems to be a policy decision. That if you apply for universal credit, so somebody could have got £2,000, which would have made a massive difference to their financial security, gets £144, and then another £144, and so on and so on. It will be over a year before they would get through universal credit the amount of financial support the £2,000 grant would have gave them. And they'll not be on universal credit come that point because they're self-employed. Hopefully they'll be back at work. But they're now faced with this situation that, although they've managed to take mortgage holidays, etc., things like car loan payments and cost of living, children being at home constantly, all these added financial pressures. I'd spoken to Stuart Jimison about this, but the council, I don't think, has much levers to just say, well, we'll create our own criteria to pay out the £2,000, because perhaps that could be open to challenge with other people asking why they've not got the £2,000. But I'm not sure if this is an issue that's still getting raised at COSLA, that we have members of our community that are living in extreme financial uncertainty at the moment. And the whole point of that being that my concern is, and I'm only guessing, and it'd be quite inappropriate probably to guess further because of people's families, but my guess is that people I know that have taken their own lives, that financial insecurity could have been one of the circumstances that was going through their heads at that time. So I think it's really great that there is so much work being done by officers regarding mental health and obviously suicide prevention. But I'm just wondering, and it doesn't need to be a report of perhaps a further communication can be circulated into what the work that's been undertaken to support people that are experiencing financial hardship and the impact that that's having on their mental health during the current crisis.
Maybe bring Alan in. I mean, Chris, you touched on about death statistics. I'm not so sure what you were meaning in terms of that, whether you were talking about suicides related to COVID would be separately identified or not, because I wouldn't have thought that would be the case.
Kind of just, because we're in private, but I know the meeting is public, I'd asked to see a breakdown and I'd seen that, and the statistics didn't seem to reflect the anecdotal evidence that I was seeing in the community in terms of registrations of
suicides.
Well, suicides or Alan will correct me, unaccountable deaths, I think.
Okay, right. Well, I'll bring Alan in, but also you raised the point about, I suppose, gaps in support and whatever. And I know these type of issues are getting discussed at COSLA, and I don't know if Alan can add to that. And obviously Louise can come in as well. Alan, do you want to come in first, and then I'll bring Louise in?
Through you, convener, accepting I'm not an expert in the registration process, but every death needs to be allocated a number in terms of the cause of death. There is a specific number of suicide, but that is only allocated where there is 100% certainty that the death was related to suicide. Where there is doubt, they leave it in a unknown category, pending post-mortems, police investigations, etc., etc. So I think I gave Councillor McElhenney the numbers that we knew for this year, and they were very, very low, the numbers for 2020, as they were relatively low for the same period last year. But Councillor McElhenney is right, there may be cases which at the moment are allocated or know that may be attributed to suicide further down the line. as far as the supports, the situation that is outlined is exactly mirrored in the business grant situation, where there are weekly changes to rules as the Scottish Government identifies gaps in the schemes that are allocated, in the schemes. And next week, I think there was a further announcement today where there's a further expansion of the scheme in the business grant side. So issues like the point that's been made around universal credit, that I perfectly understand the frustration that individuals have regarding that, they are raised via COSLA with the Scottish Government officials, and then the Scottish Government officials clearly go back and have a discussion at a political level as to whether to expand the scheme. So I'm more than happy to have a word with Stuart to see that is formally raised with COSLA officials again, to see if we get a firm answer on the universal credit situation on the self-employed grants.
Okay, just to be clear, that the £2,000 for newly self-employed people is a Scottish Government scheme, and obviously universal credit. So the Scottish Government sets the criteria for access to that scheme.
Yes.
Okay.
Just I was going to
let me bring Louise in, see if she's getting it to add, and I'll bring you back in, Chris. Louise.
Through you, convener, it's just to say I think we might be able to pick up some of the points that Councillor McElhenney has raised through the survey that we're doing. We're doing a survey with people. Your Voice have got a survey out at the moment asking people what has been good about the response to COVID-19, what have been the things they've found really hard, and what would they want support with moving forward. And I'm going to use that survey to help to support the humanitarian recovery group and the community's recovery, and hopefully be able to pick up some of those issues. And also just to give some reassurance, and just to say to elected members that the advice services that we run in the HSCP has been running every day since the beginning of the COVID, and is running online and through telephone contact, and the team is just as busy as it ever was. And so if people need some support or advice, that service is available to them, and you can redirect them to it.
Okay, Chris, you want to come out? I'm just mindful of time.
It was just that I can pass it on to officers, but it was just through Citizens Advice Scotland we had identified that basically in 2018-2019, if someone's trading profits were less than what they received through PAYE in that year, that then meant they're not eligible for the grant. So you've got quite a sizable group of people that have recently became self-employed, but because they became self-employed mid-year, they had made more in PAYE in that year than they did through self-employed. So they're not applicable for furlough, the PAYE scheme, obviously, because they're no longer working PAYE, and they're not applicable for HMRC's scheme of paying them 80% of their self-employed wages because at the time that they became self-employed. But then because of the balance in PAYE versus their self-employed income, they're not applicable for the £2,000 either. So that's one group, and the other group's obviously the group that have applied for universal credit. So I would be grateful if those two groups of people could receive representations.
Well, Alan will pick that up and have a discussion with Stuart. Lynn, you want to come in?
Yeah, just a quick question on mental health. So first of all, I mean, it's obviously good that we're now discussing it. So it would be good to see those suicide figures to see if it's COVID related or we do have a suicide problem generally, and COVID has just made us focus on it, you know. So I think it would be good to kind of get the figures at some point to try and thrash that out. I've just got a general question about the mental health and access and services. So bear with me, I'm just trying to understand the process. So I know that all the teams are there in terms of providing support, but my concern is that during the current COVID issue that we have, where there's a lack of people visiting their GP and seeking medical intervention when they think it's physical, when it's actually mental. I hope this is making sense. So if we don't have people actually going to the GP to speak to them, how are we ensuring we're catching the mental health issue? So, and also how are we catching those who have had the virus and actually living with the, talking from personal experience, I I had the virus, so it took me 6 weeks to recover. I had no kind of medical intervention, you were left. But that, living with a virus or trying to fight a virus that you know is killing people, had a huge effect on, you know, your mental health. And I think it would be the same. So, so basically my question is, how do we catch people that are not going to the GP, but maybe that's the way where the GP refers them, so we're maybe not getting those referrals. How are we going to support those post-virus people? And my last question is about, I mean, obviously the third sector is picking up a lot of this just now. What's the plans for the ongoing funding for them to give them a bit of security that after, because the mental health aspect of this will go on for a long time, and I just want to make sure that they are be able to provide that support in the longer term.
Okay, Louise, just before you come in, maybe I'll ask the question and you can answer all the questions at the same time. I know that there's certain services which are being delivered via video link, and that's useful for keeping contact with people, but it isn't particularly effective in counselling people, shall we say. So what sort of plans are in place to try and return some semblance of face-to-face contact, albeit obviously physically distanced, etc., with the appropriate protections in place, because you can't really counsel people remotely in the way you could engage with them face-to-face.
Okay, through yourself, convener, I'll pick up both those questions. So Near Me, which is Attend Anywhere, is the app that the GPs, we rolled it out in something that was going to take 3 years, and we rolled it out in 3 weeks across every GP practice, and people have been able to use, if you've got a smartphone, you can use that to have a telephone consultation with your doctor. I'm going to say primary care is relatively busy, and so it was quieter, but it's not quieter anymore. So GPs are very busy again. The mental health strategy and the CAM strategy have both got recovery. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. It's very difficult. We've got recovery plans about stepping up contact, face-to-face contact. So we, even when I look at last week's to this week, I know that there's been more face-to-face contact in mental health services, and I know that CAMS are now stepping up some of their face-to-face contacts as well. In relation to the third sector, there's two things. There's the humanitarian recovery group, which is the community group, which I'm going to chair in the first meeting of that. It's on Friday. But it's also the Mental Health Programme Board, and it's through the Mental Health Programme Board that we've been able to progress the DPI. So picking up Councillor Quinn's DPI, Distress Brief Intervention, is really like a 6-week plan, and we're going to advertise that really widely, because you don't need to go through your GP to get it. And it's going to be delivered by Sam H on our behalf. And so if that in some ways they'll be able to support people through a short period of time where they actually just need a wee bit of support rather than actually need to get into services. They just need a wee bit of support to help them feel better. And I think that the reason we were so keen to progress that tender was because we didn't recognise that that kind of 6-week post-COVID support will be required for people. And it is 6 weeks, so I'm not making that up just because Councillor Quinn said it took us 6 weeks to recover. There is 6 weeks support that's offered through the DPI process. I hope that answers at least some of the questions.
Okay, thanks Louise. I don't see any other questions, so can we agree the recommendations?
Convener, excuse me, just for the minute, am I minuting anything in terms of those representations with Stuart, or is that just a separate matter to be dealt with?
No, I think we can record that in a minute. Yeah.
Thank you, Convener.
Yeah. Okay, that takes us on to item 8, proposals for administrative arrangements, etc. Gerard.
Convener, bringing this report to members to ask for members' commitment to an online meeting system. The reason that I'm reporting in this way, Convener, the basis of this really is twofold. The first aspect is, of course, the Scottish Government's route map that was published on the 21st of May. In the route map, it's clear that gatherings, and I have to call committee meetings gatherings, they are public meetings, that they will only be restored to normality, even then subject to conditions, much phase 4 of the programme. That in phase 3, the earlier phase, that meetings such as this are certainly envisaged. People can meet in extended groups, according to the route map, but that is subject explicitly to the physical distancing requirements. Physical distancing requirements, indeed, they were referred to earlier on in some of the answers in terms of council buildings, would mean, for example, that the council chambers here have got a maximum capacity for members for 8 members or so. Now, that's not just a property assessment, that's a health and safety assessment, with health and safety saying to me in writing, we should be encouraging, officers should be encouraging online meetings only by reason of the public health restrictions. If we were to have only 8 persons within this chambers, convener, it would of course mean that our usual 11-person committees would not be possible to function this way. It would also mean, of course, that the full council with 22 members would be impossible to hold here. And of course, we can look at different venues for that. But we're talking here about the requirements, even in phase 3, of physical distancing. So that's the first basis of the request, and indeed the advice. The second basis is really the operating system itself. Today, it is quite clear we have got an operating system for the video platform that there have been some technical issues. We've had a technical break for the audio particularly, but we have got a system that has been trialled, is continuing to be trialled, and I would suggest, and I would offer this to the committee, that given the protocols that have very easily been established and fallen into by the members and taken up by the members, there's a system that works, that there are glitches that we can actually look at, and we'll be able to devote some attention to that to resolve, for example, the audio issues. For that reason, I bring forward the report, convener, and the report asks for flexibility. It asks for in-principle approval. I suppose I'm asking for a little bit more than that too, convener, of you and of the elected members. I'm asking for a commitment to move online. This would not be possible, and it will not be possible unless members want it, unless members are confident in it, members are satisfied with the justification for it being made. With all of the flexibility that I'm suggesting, the same flexibility that you're experiencing in different cases relative to the route map, different phases, and the development of proposals for recovery. The report asks for the resumption of the committee cycle as from the September cycle. That would mean, of course, the August Policy and Resources meeting. There are continuing uncertainties in terms of the progress of the route map, but there is one certainty that I can certainly has a relevance for any decisions today. Of our 22 members, 4 of those members certainly fall within a group that would be considered to be vulnerable. There might be more members that would be unknown to me, but there's certainly 4 just in terms of the range of issues and the categories there. And on participation is critical for purposes of ensuring fairness and inclusivity, not just amongst all members, but also with those members who could not be expected to attend committee meetings within the council chambers. I accept that the video conferencing system requires further trials. There's some technical issues to deal with. There are restrictions on public access, and I've proposed in one of the sections in the report, section 6, what we might be able to do as a council, if approved by the members, about the recording of online meetings to make sure they're publicly available, to ask for and make available press representation at the WebEx invitation level, and for corporate comms to continue what they have been doing in terms of the minutes, the draft minutes, making sure that they are available well as readable draft minutes as soon as possible. And I'm aware from what Alan said earlier to you, convener, as well, that we might then be able also to go further than the recording of meetings, but also do the webcasting of meetings, and I think that might be potentially envisaged.
I'm sure the public of Inverclyde are desperately waiting for that.
Convener, I would end simply by saying that obviously there's issues for the quasi-judicial tribunals, and that I would have to develop protocols for that. But the provisional timetable of meetings is put forward to you for, in principle, approval with a commitment to online meetings only. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Gerard. I've just got a wee message that I'm now the host of this meeting, so I feel empowered by that. Chris, you want to come in?
Thanks. Thanks, Jerry. Broadly supportive that we need to get committees back up and running, because that's pretty much essential for everybody to be involved and scrutinise council decisions. I do think it's a bit of a retrograde proposal you make, in that by your logic, the further we move out of lockdown restrictions, the more we as members restrict ourselves and our involvement in the chamber. So perhaps if you had been proposing, if the technology was good enough 2 months ago, this maybe, but for me it doesn't really make sense that as well. Saying you can go bowling, as I'll say again, you can go and play golf, you can go and exercise, you can meet in groups of up to 8 socially distanced, albeit two households. Outdoors. We are essential workers, key workers. I would remind you, we're not meeting here as members of the public, having a public meeting like a PTA. We are undertaking essential work as identified in the exemptions that were issued at the time. So we have staff that are here physically. We have employers across Inverclyde with staff physically, and people may disagree, but I take the view that the work that we undertake on behalf of Inverclyde is very important and it's essential, and local democracy and scrutiny is. So I wouldn't be keen for a blanket approach that just all meetings go online and all physical attendance at meeting is removed. But I think there is a need for flexibility, as you say. The practicality is that you can't host 22 members in the chamber, and means that we quite simply can't have a full council meeting here. And also a committee, we can't possibly, well, we could have a full council meeting, obviously, because the quorum's only 7, I think. Same with committee, we can't have full participation. So perhaps there is a leeway that nominated members on behalf of political groups can attend in person, such as we're seeing right now, with other members participating online, and perhaps for the full council, we can look to expand into a bigger venue where social physical distancing is easier, such as the saloon downstairs. And again, if not, we could have a situation that nominated members of political groups can attend, but anyone else want to participate has to obviously do it online. I think I would have issue in that you made your statement on inclusivity as if it was a matter of fact, but that was your opinion. I don't agree with your point that we're not being inclusive because certain members then feel there's a prohibitive policy in place. And I know for a fact that one of the councillors in my group has in the past raised the point that he's certainly not made to feel that there's an inclusive approach when every member of the council is requested to stand up as per standing orders when the provost enters the full council, when he's not able to do that. So I mean, that to me is an issue of inclusivity. So I don't accept that members that are in shielding categories having to use virtual technology to dial in if they're not able to come into the council meeting means that in some way that we're being uninclusive as members by wanting to come into the meeting. I would actually reject that outright. I think that the recommendations in 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3, as I say broadly, are fair, but I think 3.4, and I don't think it would be useful to start proposing alternatives. I think there's a need for a offline piece of work, whether it's through the members of this committee or the Strategic Leadership Forum as a sounding board, to try and develop something that's a bit different from what you're proposing here.
Okay, I'm going to bring in others before I bring you back in, Gerard, but just in terms, I suppose, of the standing orders can be changed. So any member can bring forward a proposal to change the standing order that you don't stand up when the provost comes in.
Point of clarity, Convener, can I make the point that the council officer will always say members stand if able, please stand if able, and that's something that we've been doing constantly over the course of the past 6 years.
But all the point I'm saying is if any member or members feel strongly about that, they can bring forward a proposal to change standing orders. But I'm going to bring in Lynn first and then Graham.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm happy with the report. I take Chrissy's point about choice. So obviously, just today we've all got a choice in a certain way that some members can turn up in person, and some, as long as they're under the 8, and some can actually go online. So I think in the report it'd be good to mention, actually not under just the shielding category, but actually under sort of family friendly, because I will have restrictions in my time because my children will be part homeschooled, part going to school, so I'll have childcare issues. So actually the online suits me because I don't then have a childcare issue. But I would also like to look at the timings. I'm very conscious as I hear my husband dropping the pots in the kitchen, that actually having the meetings later on at night might actually start interfering with our kind of family life. So it would be good to maybe try, especially those that are going to be on longer, to maybe look at the timings to see if we can, if they're online, could we make them earlier so that they finish at a reasonable time. I absolutely support the recording. I think we really need to record them. That's something we maybe should have been done before then. Just a couple of questions, and one question from Councillor Alfeld as well. Will there be a digital training happening for elected members? I'm just conscious that some elected members might not be comfortable with the online digital world. And also Councillor Alfeld has got a specific question about the licensing board, and what he says is there was normally a private session for the licence board to make sure that that continues, that needs to be in private, and they need to have a space prior to each of the licence board to discuss any sort of legal issues.
Okay, I'm going to bring Graham in.
No, to Councillor McElhinney covered all my points. I'm fully supportive of Councillor McElhinney's points.
Good that you are in cahoots. Oh, sorry, sort of common ground. Gerard.
Could I address Councillor Quinn's points first, please, Convener?
You address them in whatever order you are, because I'm losing the will to live at 5 to 6, but carry on.
Thank you, Convener. Training, yes, Councillor Quinn, and licensing board private sessions, yes. Provision will be made and can be made for that, irrespective of, and there is electronic legislative background for electronic meetings for the licensing board, so assurance is there. In terms of Councillor McElhinney's points, Convener, I'm going to give an opinion, and I'm also then going to refer to some facts. I was caveating my remarks that way. Convener, can I suggest this? That the technical difficulties that we've been having today with the audio and what we've tried to iron out right from the start of this, it's not a retrograde step. If we'd had this step earlier, we'd have been able to use this. But they arise from the fact that we're not using the WebEx platform, which is a very good established platform, in the way that it's intended. The difficulties that we're having with the muting and unmuting and the feedback and the like are because we're all trying to do two things. We're not having a remote meeting, we're having a meeting that's partly remote and partly within the chambers. It's a hybrid, and that's causing some of the technical difficulties that are here. And I say that with reference to the experience of other local authorities, because obviously we've done some tests on what they're doing, and by far they're going for remote meetings. Not all, but a lot of them are. The second point is, and this is my opinion, I believe that members feel that given the setup for the PNR Executive Subcommittee, which is conducting really vital governance business in providing adequate scrutiny of a whole range of decisions, they're all logged, and beyond that, they're back to the normal resumption of committee reports now. But members quite understandably feel that this is the nucleus of the meeting. And I say that with regard to the councillors who are attending remotely, that some members might believe that there's a nucleus of a meeting, this is where it's happening, so the sort of wrong signal is being sent out. That's why we've gone the whole hog and actually requested paragraph 3.4 to commit to the solely online. but I have to be guided by the members. The members must have confidence in the system. The members must be happy with how they're going to engage and fulfil their duties. Convener, in terms of the factual basis that I did say I would eventually return to, Councillor McElhenney did make the point about the actual operation of the system and it being retrograde. Well, the Scottish Government is providing the route map that we're working to for recovery. And that is saying that indoor office workplaces can recommence in phase 3. So if we're saying that this is not a gathering, and this is a gathering, it's a public meeting, but we've got special permissions to deal with that. But the indoor office arrangements don't take place to phase 3 and we're in phase 1. So I'm trying to say, trying to provide a governance system that is sound, but using and respecting the Scottish Government guidance, but that would mean to say that we would not have committee meetings in normal form until phase 4. If we have it in phase 3, even with phase 3, the distancing requirements would mean to say we have to change the venue.
I think I've been causing most of the technical problems with having this hybrid meeting, Gerard. I mean, I understand, I suppose, the two different perspectives. I absolutely understand it. And I think the fact that we are having the hybrid meeting does cause some issues, and it causes people to think, well, should again or shouldn't again, and whatever. And I think it's a reasonable suggestion to say, let's take this offline and have a discussion about it. But equally, maybe it's a reasonable suggestion to say, let's try it for one cycle of meetings to see how it works out and then review it. And I suppose by that point, we'll have more clarity on the route map out of lockdown. And we can then, having reviewed it, decide whether it's safe to go back to all attendance meetings or a hybrid model or whatever. I mean, there are practical issues in the meantime that need to be addressed around just this building. And then if you were talking about potentially moving the meetings from here to somewhere else in the building, like the saloon, like the town hall itself, but there's going to be calls on the town hall and the saloon for other purposes for a significant period of time. So I would be tempted to say, let's give it a go for a cycle, see how it works out, and then review it and have a discussion among the groups at that point, rather than necessarily having an options appraisal, looking at the different ways we could do it and then try to come to a consensus around that. I would suggest we give it a try. But Chris, you want to come back?
Thanks. Just 1 point, 1 question. The point being, I just don't see how I can turn around to the parents I represent and Inverclyde Council employees or school teachers and say to them, well, yep, absolutely, it's safe for you to be back at school because we've got these plans in place. But the Education and Communities Committee of the 21st of August, well, the members aren't actually able to meet in person for that. We're doing that online. I just think it's going to create an issue. I think that we have a physically distanced meeting going on right now, and the justifications back from Mr Nolan where we would need to do other things. None of your points where we can't do that. It was just we would need to do other things. So I think if we can explore doing other things, I'd like to see that being exhausted before we say we've got to put all meetings online. I've got one specific question though, because it might be applicable to some of my group members, some other group members also. I was checking the legislation, as I know you're more than familiar with, and I couldn't see anything about the 6-month rule for attendance at meetings contained within the legislation to say that was exempt. Now, because of when the coronavirus crisis happened, there are members of everybody's group, I think, perhaps were either the end of February or the start of March was the last time they attended a meeting of the council. And the next full meeting of the council isn't scheduled until the 17th of September. And obviously then of members in a situation that they only miss one committee that they're on, they could be in a situation that they've went by their 6 months. So is that something you can maybe look at? Because I'm sure there would be a will there that would make that work, because of somebody obviously has went over 6 months because there wasn't a meeting for them to attend, or they only missed one meeting because, well, either any reason they want really, or because of their personal circumstances. I don't think it'd be ideal for us to bring reports to the council to make a ruling on that. So I was wondering if you could maybe address that for us.
Jerry, you can, while you think about that point, just in terms of, Chris, the sort of point you're making about staff going into schools, and we often think it's only teachers that are staff in schools. I know the Scottish Government tends to only mention teachers, but we're talking about a whole range of staff going into schools and parents sending their children to school. Right, so in terms of these meetings, what we've got to ask ourselves is it an essential journey for us to come in here? Or can we actually participate in the meetings effectively and fulfil our scrutiny role by sitting in our kitchens or our living rooms and doing that? So we've got to ask ourselves that. But in terms of staff going into school, the reason the government wants staff to go back into school is they recognise that you can't teach completely remotely. You need to have teachers and other staffs in school. You need to have kids in school, particularly the ones that can't really learn remotely. You need to get in. But no member of staff will go into school or requires to go into school if they consider it's not safe. And no parent will send their child to school if they don't consider it safe. Our job, and we're going to come on to a report, our job as a council in the coming weeks is to ensure that as far as we are concerned, the risks to our pupils, to our staff, of it being physically located in schools is kept to an absolute minimum and is an acceptable level of risk. You can never eradicate the risk, you can never eradicate it, but there's a huge job of work to be done to satisfy the staff and to satisfy parents that that's the case, and to satisfy the pupils that that's the case. There has to be risk assessments undertaken. There has to be social distance, physical distance measures put into place. There has to be cleaning regimes, etc. So all of that has to be done before the staff will be convinced that it's safe to go into school and fulfil their job, and parents. So I think it's no a similar analogy, and I don't think in any way that we would be failing our constituents, failing the community, would in any sense be lacking leadership if we actually decided to sit in our kitchens and attend meetings rather than coming into these buildings. And in fact, you could argue we'd actually be shown leadership, because we'd actually be saying, we don't need to go into the council chamber, the buildings, to attend a meeting. So we're not going to go through that non-essential journey, and potentially on that non-essential journey do things that in any way, however small, could contribute to the potential for this virus to get out of control again. So we had a fair debate about this last night in our group, and there were different viewpoints, but I think that there is absolutely a case to be made that the sensible thing for us to do at this point in time would be to limit the journeys. I'm not intending to go to Edinburgh anytime soon, and I was regularly going to Edinburgh. I'm not intending to go to Edinburgh for a COSLA meeting anytime soon. I'll be attending via phone or Microsoft Teams or whatever. I'm not intending to go through Edinburgh to have meetings with government ministers anytime soon, etc. So the question for me is, if I can do all of that from home, assuming the IT gets sorted out, I can attend these meetings and share these meetings and participate from home. So, as I said, I'm not necessarily convinced of that argument, but I would like us to try and achieve a consensus in terms of the way forward.
Convener?
Yeah, Graham?
Yeah, you said a cycle, so can you confirm, because obviously one of the challenges I would have is I would maybe come into my office, Conservative office, and lead from there, so I can have photocopies, I can do these things. But if you're saying that for a cycle, can you confirm what that is, and is there a sunset clause on it, that the decision drops? Or that would be good, or would there have to be another PNR or full council would have to amend the decision we make today?
No, but what I'm saying is we would review the decision after a full cycle. So the first cycle ends with the council meeting on the 24th of September. So, I mean, I would suggest we have a report to the council meeting on the 24th of September on this particular issue. And I think a cycle's all you would need. And by that time, we maybe have greater clarity in where we are in the phase sort of coming out of a lockdown. I mean, from a personal perspective, yeah, there's a comfort factor in sitting in this chair rather than sitting at home and chairing a meeting. But albeit I did do it from my office because we can't get the technology to work at the moment. I chaired a meeting of 40 people for Causeless Children and Young People Board sitting in the office. And actually, it was a lot easier chairing the meeting sitting in the office remotely than doing it in a meeting with 40 people around the table. So all I'm saying is I understand the issues that people have got, but could we give it a try for the first cycle of meetings ending on the council on the 24th of September and have a review at that point?
I'm just going to speak freely without intending any offence to any of the conveners, but so officers are confident that the conveners of our committees will have the appropriate training in place and the capability, and you might be able to chair the meetings yourself, and because of your experiences it's fine. We're confident that the provost will be able to sit at home and absolutely no issues at all with chairing a meeting online, and the conveners of all the committees. I don't have that confidence, and that's not a slight on people. That's because we're asking people to do things new that they've never done before, and we're also asking them to be fully conversant now within only a 4-week time period.
No,
I don't see that as being realistic.
You might not have that confidence, Chris, but I think I can actually speak on behalf of the conveners because they're actually all members of my group, apart from obviously the quasi-judicial meetings, that they've all happy to sign up for this. And it is about people being comfortable with the technology, and the more that we can do between now and when the first cycle of meetings happens, the easier that becomes. So we've obviously this week had 2 members' briefings, tail end of last week and this week, and both of them were reasonably successful. A number of us have obviously participated in this meeting on a number of occasions now, and I think if we can get more opportunities between now and the end of June, and even we can set up training sessions, because you basically can use the technology to set up meetings. I've had officers, rather than pick up the phone to me saying, can we have a quick WebEx team meeting? So I think absolutely, we need to make sure every member has got the technology working and they've got the same access, and we need to make sure everybody's comfortable with using it, and that does include obviously the chairs of the meetings. I would be confident between now and when we kick off the cycle of meetings that we can do that and achieve that end. And if there are problems, they will become apparent in the course of a trial period. And I think that's all we're talking about, a trial for one cycle. Okay, Lynn?
Yeah, it's just a point to add. So I think we talked about training. So my point earlier was about the training, which I think has been minuted, and it'll be actioned that training will be provided, which will include convener training on how to host a meeting, not just how to participate. Just another point to add as well. I mean, obviously, if we've got a requirement to come into the building, so obviously today you've got staff there, you've got admin staff, you've got cleaning staff that actually have to make that space safe from a health and safety point of view. So in effect, us ensuring we want to come to a building, we're actually putting pressure on the council, you know, in terms of cleaning staff and admin staff and everything else. So I think we just need to put that in the mix as well.
Okay. Because I've seen Mr Malone was agreeing with you, Councillor Quinn. So when we go online, can you just, what extra pressure is that going to take away from officers and staff then? Because you were agreeing with the point. You've got your suit on now, so I'm assuming you were in the office all day. Officers at the moment have taken up the opportunity, as you could have, not to be here and lead by example on a report we're proposing on joining a meeting. So I'm just curious as to see what the point was there. How will it make the working environment safer for staff cleaning staff and officers by members not being here?
Convener, there's a different cleaning regime that not every room in the current period is cleaned on a daily basis. So the cleaners are able to focus on those rooms that are used. There are differences in terms of the attendance at this meeting. Officers, there are greater number of visits to the buildings, and I suppose every visit to the building should be tested against the threshold whether that visit is essential, whether it's actually necessary, and there is an alternative and effective means of participation at these meetings through the video platform. So I would agree with the point that was made on that basis. I think that the key issue is there an effective means of scrutiny and policy direction by elected members through an online system? And I think the answer to that question is yes. And there will be a full period of training offered for that.
Just saying it's up to members to decide if the answer is yes or no to whether members think there's an adequate level of scrutiny.
Okay, right. We've given this a good airing, and I know there's important papers we're still to get to, right? So to cut to the chase, I'm going to move the recommendations in the report, but in terms of, when I can find it, the final recommendation that it's for one cycle only, with a review to be carried out basically towards the end of that cycle, with a report to the full council meeting on the 24th of September. Which will be an online council meeting. Yes, yes.
I mean, I think it would have been useful for members to have been involved in the paper being produced, because ultimately it's about members holding officers to account and scrutinising decisions. So I don't see the point of going to another vote. I would be contented to support that for one cycle then, if you gave a good faith offer that you'll actually engage with members this time to see what you can put in place to take on board the comments I made. And it sounds like Councillor Brooks and his colleague supported, instead of just saying we'll have one cycle and at the end of that one cycle see how it went without actually doing any work to try and allow members to physically attend meetings.
Well, I think that in the spirit of what I proposed, Chris, the intention would be officers would carry out a consultation with elected members as part of that review, right? Now, I sometimes have to remind myself, and I suppose others, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're having these meetings every fortnight. And you can imagine, and the agenda seem to be longer as well, you can imagine the pressure and the time commitment there is on the part of officers to produce reports for meetings, to do all the other things out with meetings. So I think cut officers a wee bit of slack, right? We've had a good airing here. Officers have heard the views of members, and we've agreed a way forward. And yes, there will be a thorough review, taking into account the views of members and looking at different options going forward. And at some point in the future, maybe it will be fine to have the meetings in-house. But I agree with Lynn's point, actually, that the new normal going forward will be that we should offer the facility to members to attend the meetings remotely going forward. And I don't see us ever necessarily coming back to a point where every single member sitting in the chamber. That's only my personal view. But we will discuss that another day.
Will we add the further review into the recommendations as well?
Yes. Okay, can we agree on that? Right, so it's got 5 minutes to discuss the reopening of schools and all the other reports. Okay, item 9. Ruth, reopening of schools, etc.
I'll keep the introduction brief. This report is about the reopening of schools in early years and childcare provision. If I talk you through the phasings to begin with, this week, the week beginning the 1st of June, our schools are open to staff predominantly senior management team who are going through risk assessments and looking at planning for opening, and also planning for on the 8th of June when we will dismantle the childcare hubs, the 9 childcare hubs, and put those back to their own schools. So people who are currently use the childcare hubs will go back to the child's own school. We have said from the 10th of June that we will, schools should accept small transition groups in. There's guidance on this and it will follow the guidance. It's predominantly key transition periods, so that we P1 and S1 and any child who would undertake an enhanced transition. There's a letter out to parents today explaining this, and it also explains that we will be sending a survey out tomorrow to look at their childcare requirements as we go forward. We will continue teaching until the end of term. We will then put in small, over the summer holidays, we will put a small amount of hubs for childcare, again, for the key workers and the most vulnerable. We're undertaking engagement with staff groups, unions, the Youth Council and the chairs of parent councils, and we're currently looking at models for opening on a phased basis, taking into account the national guidance. The working groups are covered in section 6 and they're doing a lot of work about what that recovery will look like. The report also asks members to consider the opening of the 11th of August. Those on the Education and Communities Committee will know that we go through the local negotiating committee for teachers, and we provide the Education and Communities Committee agree the holidays. Our school term begins on the 14th of August. The national requirement is for schools to open the 11th of August. I'm afraid I can't give you an absolute guarantee of when it will open to pupils, because the Scottish Negotiation Committee is currently looking at the inset days. So the report asks for agreement in principle that schools will open on the 11th of August, but that might take into account, it might vary taking into account the in-service days. I will do my best to answer any questions, but please be aware that there are lots of things that I will not have answers to at this stage.
We've got some technical issues in the chamber, so we missed a wee bit of what you were saying, but we should be able to pick it up. Yeah, no, I'm trying to speak through the machine. I don't know if I need to put my microphones on. Oh, I'm unmuted. Hear me now? Hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we've got technical issues in the chamber. The systems went down, so I'm speaking through the laptop. So we got most of what you said. We missed some of it, but I'm going to open it up to questions. Linda, you got a question?
Yeah, I just want to talk about the 11th of August. What is the rush about 11th August versus 14th of August? I don't really see the rush for those 3 days, because I would assume that the 3 days are going to be really important at the other end in June when you're gaining a bit of momentum. So is there any pushback that we could have on that with the Scottish Government to say, well, actually, we've already agreed the 14th, we don't see what the difference three days will make? I'm conscious that we're probably, there's a lot, as a parent, there are 1,000 questions I could probably ask, but I realise that we're at a really early stage of the planning. It's just to try and get an idea, are we looking at 50%? As our buildings be able to cope with 50%, or will it only be 50% for certain pupils and others will be less that can cope? I've got an S6 who I can understand, she said 20% would be enough for her. So is it 50% or will that vary depending on what stage, what age and stage they're at?
I'm going to take a number of questions, so Elizabeth next.
Mine's more a comment really, just because this is going to be a movable feast, it's going to be something that's really iterative over the coming months. I'm just quite keen that we as members don't jump in with too many objections or issues or whatever in something that's almost like we're going to
It's not worth it. It's fine. I just don't think we should be arsey, basically, is what I was going to say.
We are recording this.
I'm happy to stand by that comment.
Okay, Graham, then Chris.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just to check with Ruth whether the definition of the critical worker is in the gift of Scotland's governments, or whether we can actually identify additional critical workers. And obviously then, if they have that identity, we can bring them in, maybe we can look after the children in a different context. So critical worker, is it our definition or is it Scotland's government's?
Chris, you use your microphone.
Thanks, Convener. Ruth, it's just, I suppose, to address the balance of educational needs versus childcare needs. So where the report says that you think you'll establish a hub in every school. So I was just wondering what the capacity you intend would be looking like in those hubs. And that relates obviously to then if you think you have an estimate of when you'll be able to start to give parents an indication of what the particulars will be in terms of the days and times, etc., that their children will physically attend school, because the feedback I've received is that's obviously quite an important issue in people being able to apply for flexible working and change their own current working conditions, so that by the time it comes to school starting on the 11th of August, they're able to seamlessly continue to work and then obviously have children physically attending school, because I know that a lot of parents have exhausted their annual leave allowances already, so they could be in a difficult situation of they maybe don't get enough notice as to how they will balance their own working life, and many of them particularly working at home as well, which sometimes people think makes childcare easier, but if you've got to end, as you were saying, your Microsoft Teams meeting to go to do a school run, etc., these could be quite disruptive for people.
Okay, Ruth, you want to try and address those questions?
Okay, so the first question was about the 11th of August. That was agreed nationally to give a common starting date for all schools. What I would say is my advice would be not to push against this. I absolutely get why the rush, but it was just so all schools in Scotland were starting on a similar date. We've had no worry from our unions or either locally or nationally on that, and I think there's a joint agreement. It also helps keep a consistency for us around getting teachers in. If all the other authorities are starting at the same time, our teachers' kids will be in different schools. So from my opinion, I wouldn't see a pushback on the 11th of August. I think it's a reasonable and proportionate measure, but we do have to do some HR work around that at the other side. The 50% or 33%, currently the national guidance which came out on Thursday is around 2 metres. However, also we're seeing in England that there is meetings around half the class, 50%, and we'll see that nationally as well. We have to be very careful that the two sets of guidance don't conflict with each other. So we're looking at two models, and we're looking at half the children being in school. And we're also looking at approximately a third of the children being in school, and we will have to keep abreast of what the science is saying and what the national picture is as to which of those models will go forward. Thank you, Councillor Robertson, for your comments. I won't repeat it, but actually this is a time we have to work with our staff We have to work with our parents, we have to work with our young people, we have to work with the different unions, all who are supporting beyond the teaching unions to make this work. The critical worker, the answer to that is we will just use the national guidance. We triage that national guidance because it's not just a case of who is a critical worker, it's also what if you have two parents at home, what each of those does, and if there is a possibility for them to work part-time. So for Councillor Brooks, I would say we would not come away from the national or the Scottish Government agreement of critical workers, and I think there's strength in all the schools across Scotland having that. Councillor McElhenney, you said about the balance between education and childcare in hubs, and that will be affected by whether or not it's 50% or 33%. So it's very difficult to say to parents, this is definitely what we can offer your children, when actually we don't know what the model of education will look like, and it can change. We've had a very, very positive engagement with the chairs of parent councils, where we were able to explain to them the pros and cons of the different models as we take them forward. And I've had some very sensible answers back from them, understanding that and saying, here's what we think. Same with the Youth Council, when I was saying to them there are different models here. The Youth Council were very good at articulating what they had spoken to their friends about the different learners' experiences. So we have to bear that all in mind. When will parents get feedback? They will get feedback as soon as we possibly can, but we have to engage with them to begin with about their childcare needs as we go forward.
I don't see any other questions, so can we agree recommendations? Okay, takes us on to item 10, enhanced cleaning in establishments, COVID-19 recovery. Ruth, are you going to speak to that?
Convener, it's Tony here, Tony McEwen. I'm just going to talk to this report, if that's okay.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks.
Okay, so this report's seeking approval in light of COVID-19 to introduce enhanced cleaning in our schools, nurseries and offices, and the financial implications of doing so. So just to keep members up to date, the current cleaning regime priorities hygiene areas only, with other cleaning tasks occurring in fewer times than that. So in developing this programme of enhanced cleaning, we've worked with health and safety and also the current guidance issued by the Scottish Government in its strategic framework for opening schools. Possibly the most significant change is to introduce day cleaning across our establishments, including our offices, to make sure hygienic areas and touch points are cleaned more regularly than otherwise would be the case. So I'm asking committee to note the report and also approve the enhanced cleaning regime that's been set out in it, and critically the allocation of a £500,000 budget to fund the extra cleaning operatives, supervisors and materials for a period of 6 months initially. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Chris, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, it's a substantial resource that's been requested, so it's obviously quite important to look into the paper. The £475,000 is on employee costs, but only £25,000 on material costs. So you can make a fair assumption there that we're not talking about a deep cleaning regime happening every day and every night. And obviously, with schools being closed from home time until the next morning, there's obviously a gestation period there that the guidance I read said that the virus wouldn't survive on a hard surface from 3 PM one day until 8 AM the next day. So I wonder if that's what the proposed regime is at the end of the day compared to the current staff that are employed to clean schools and their ability to continue their normal duties. I suppose it's a bit of a bugbear that so much resource has to be spent on cleaning communal hand areas, because it obviously means that hand hygiene's still not good enough, and if hand hygiene was good enough, that wouldn't be an issue. A specific question though, Tony, and also for Stephen McNabb, is in the earlier report we had the absence rate of council staff, so there's quite a substantial amount of council staff still absent. And in previous committees, Stephen had told us that that wasn't all people that were absent through ill health. There was a sizable amount of our workforce that were currently at home because the job they do, it's not been possible to do that job whilst adhering to physical distancing measures. So the world is changing, and in any other organisation, if you had a large amount of resource, i.e. your workers, at home because the job they did do, they couldn't do socially distancing, I don't think that you would then go in and employ £475,000 of extra workforce resource when you've got a resource at the moment that's not able to work. So I would just like to clarify if that's actually been explored about redeploying people that are at home because they can't do their current role into this role, because then that wouldn't have any net cost to the council, or certainly it wouldn't have the £475,000 cost.
Okay, I'm going to take other questions, Tony, before I bring you back in. So Graham and then Lynn.
Thanks for asking. 6.3, you claim that you state that it's a 6-month period. We're just, Councillor Wilson was just interested to know, is that because you believe that the crisis is over in 6 months? Or is there any reason that you've picked 6 months? Why aren't these permanent jobs? Or why aren't we using other people?
Okay, Lynn.
Yeah, so I'm just, I mean, obviously it's a lot of money, but I absolutely agree it needs to be done. I don't think there's any questions that we need to keep up the hygiene, especially if we're talking about our schools going back, so that's going to be, something that we just need to do. I'm just trying to establish that we don't yet know what our school programme looks like in terms of whether it's a group of kids in the same day, or we're talking about half days, one lot in the morning, one lot in the afternoon. Clearly the cleaning will be different based on what model we go with. So if we've got a bit of leeway in there in terms of if we do go for, if kids are in half day, then obviously we need to clean at lunchtime.
Okay, Tony, do you want to come in with us?
Okay. If I could address, I suppose, or try and address Councillor McElhenney's. I'm assuming when you're talking about other staff that are off, it's other staff other than cleaning staff. Do you mean, can you just clarify, do you mean like other staff across the council?
Yes, council employees that aren't off because they're in isolation or because they're sick or any other reason other than the job that they're employed to do. It's been risk assessed that they cannot do that job because they can't both do the job and adhere to physical distance measures. Stephen McNabb had updated as a previous committee that was not a small number, that was a significant number. So the question I'd asked was an attempt to look at, as things are very much different in the world at the moment, these staff members to see if they could be redeployed.
I'm conscious of time. Right, I'll bring Stephen McNabb in that particular question.
Thank you.
I know that, Chris, but I'm just mindful of time here. So, Stephen, you got the gist of the question about redeployment into the cleaning posts.
Yes, thank you, through you, convener. Yes, Councillor McElhenney, the previous reports that have come to the committee have obviously highlighted high levels of absence, and it does include a number of employees across the council that are at home because they're non-essential workers and basically they're essentially on unauthorised absence. Now, there has been some discussions with the trade unions about redeployment of some of these staff. The trade union's position, obviously, is that should be done on a voluntary basis. And I think since we've had those discussions with the trade unions, probably the world has moved on a little bit in terms of those staff that may have been appropriate to look at redeploying into these roles. It was probably some of your frontline street scene, grounds maintenance roles that were basically at home in authorised absence. We're beginning to see a number of these staff groups coming back now, so I don't think there is a great number that's actually still in that position. The additional thing is, obviously, as the staff are coming back, this obviously resource within the schools is going to be a slightly longer term. obviously Tony's report is indicating an initial period of 6 months. So that probably wouldn't be sustainable, I don't think, in terms of redeploying our existing workforce. I think that, you know, if things go to plan, they will be back in their own roles. But it's not being discounted, absolutely, but I think we have had some consideration with the trade unions about redeploying resources. But I think given the length of a resource and the time that's going to be required for the cleaning staff in schools, you know, I think it would be difficult to redeploy, and I don't think we've probably got the numbers that are in that position now, Councillor McElhinney, in terms of redeploying them to schools.
Okay, Tony, you want to come in the other points?
Okay, so the other point, the 6 month period is just, it's not that I think it will be over in 6 months, it's just that we can't be sure, and I didn't want to, I suppose, commit to something over 12 months if it only lasted. So I'm proposing that I would come back if the enhanced regime is required for longer than that. So that was the thinking around the 6 month period.
Okay, does that cover all the points members had?
Sorry, Councillor Quinn, as well. Sorry, convener, what you asking?
Yeah, no, just carry on and address all the points.
Councillor Quinn, we're working really closely in our D&T about going back, and we are doing our best to try and be able to respond to that quickly. We understandably, the cleaners can only really be in when the pupils are not, because we're already going to be stuck for space. So we will respond to whatever the model will look like, and I'm confident with that resource, with the additional day cleaning, that we would be able to do that, alongside people's personal responsibility to keep their workplace or their desk space clean as well. So it will come as with a number of other measures, but that's what we're hoping to do.
Okay, Councillor, you want to come back in?
Thanks, Convener. Councillor MacLeod had asked me to ask a question on this, that when the new staff are being advertised, he had the concern that from his experience, people have various different cleaning jobs that they carry out for different employers. So he was concerned that obviously then people may be cleaning in a school, which obviously many people think could be an environment with children or bringing the virus into it. And then they could also have another cleaning job in a care home. So obviously people aren't allowed to move between one care home to the other of their social care workers in the care homes. So he was looking for clarity on would that be something we would look to mitigate, that we wouldn't be having people taking on these additional posts, cleaning in our schools, and then potentially in the evening or during the day also cleaning in a care home.
Stephen, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have a number of employees that have got a number of jobs, and the line has always been that any employment with the council, if they've got any other employment, that needs to be discussed with their manager as to whether it's appropriate or whether it has any impact on them undertaking their role with the council. So that Councillor McElhinney's highlighted a specific risk there in terms of perhaps an employee that's also working in a care home establishment, and that would need to be taken into account before making any appointment to the council, and the risks would have to be assessed to see whether it'd be appropriate or not to do that. But it's certainly part of anybody that's employed with the council who is gaining other remuneration from another post has to disclose that, and an assessment's made about the impact on their role with the council. So yes, we would consider that before appointing anybody.
Okay. Given those reassurances, can we agree recommendations? Yeah. Okay, that takes us on to item 11, COVID-19 recovery update. Is that you, Martin? You're on mute, Martin.
Sorry, I thought I'd unmuted it, so I didn't click it. Through you, convener, this is an update on the recovery process, both the council's internal recovery process and the community recovery process. Since the last report came, the Recovery Working Group has met a second time. It met yesterday and will meet again on the 29th. The 3 subgroups are due to meet in the near future. I know that the humanitarian subgroup is meeting this week coming, and the economic and the education subgroups will be meeting fairly soon. What this report also does, though, is it brings a proposal for a recovery sounding board for members to give members the opportunity to feed into the process. This is an informal group due to the fact that the actual recovery working group that it is advising falls under the remit of the Alliance, the Inverclyde Alliance. We have looked at various models of representation, and there are a number of difficulties round about actually having members on the individual groups, primarily round about making sure that there's adequate and fair representation of all groups. So the Recovery Sounding Board seems to be a reasonable model that would allow all groups representation. It meets the political balance rules, albeit it doesn't currently include all groups, as obviously it's based on a similar basis to the PNR exec sub. It would be open to this group, though, as it's an informal working group, to actually co-opt additional members should it wish to. And the group would advise the chief executive who chairs the recovery working group. The proposal is that it would meet the week before the recovery working group, the next meeting of which is on the 29th. So probably the first meeting would be in the week preceding that. I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, right, Chris. Lynn first and then Chris.
Yeah, excuse me. I've got a couple of questions. I've got a question from Councillor Alfeld, so I'll take that first, it'll be easier. So under 5.2, we're talking about in the second phase, the restaurants may open outdoor spaces. Is there any way that we can fast track the planning process to allow our restaurants to start using some of the outdoor spaces?
Okay, I would maybe defer possibly to Scott.
Martin, hold on a wee sec. Lynn, just ask all your questions and I'll get Chris's and then I'll let Martin and other officers come in.
Okay, so on the economic recovery group, what I was asking is there any reps from our town centre regeneration forums going on that? I'm not talking about elected members, I'm talking about some of our business folk that are on our regeneration forums already, to engage them in our economic group. Also on the sounding board, so in principle, I'm happy with that recommendation. I would only suggest that that sounding board is different from the PNR exec committee, which is here. If not, we'll just get a repeat of pretty much 2 committees and just a repeat of the same people coming up with the same ideas. And my last point is on the humanitarian. How will the IJB feed into that one? So I know we've got a sounding board for members, but I know we've got a different setup for IJB. So can we get maybe some reps from our IJB involved in so maybe a separate sounding board for IJB?
Okay, before I bring Chris in, just in terms of the sounding board, if we agree with the sounding board, it's up to the political groups to nominate who they want to go into the sounding board. So if a political group wants different people on the sounding board from the PNR exec, then that's, they're perfectly entitled to do that. Okay, Chris.
Sorry, my question was just going to be to clarify whether nominations were being accepted today, because we obviously discussed that other group, so we would have 2 people to join the sounding board, because obviously the paper in advance notice, I just assumed everyone would have done that. The other point being a question for officers. On Appendix 1, officers have made an assumption that the chair of the sounding board would be someone from the Labour group. that seems quite a broad assumption from officers, because obviously it's politically balanced, but obviously even as leader would concede that that doesn't necessarily mean that a member of the Labour group should chair the board. I would be more content if the board themselves just adopt appointed their own chair amongst themselves.
I mean, I think on that, and Gerard will come in on that point, but I think on that, the standing protocol is that it is not a member of the Labour group, but a member of the administration that would chair that. But we can come back to that point. Okay, Martin, you want to deal with the points that you want?
Can we get back on that point, because I noticed Gerard nodding.
We will come back on that. I'm going to bring Martin in to answer the points that Martin can answer, and I'll bring Gerard in and any other points that he needs to answer. Martin.
Okay, probably on the first two, I will maybe defer the question on the planning process and the question on the reps for from the Regeneration Fora. I'll defer to Scott, as he's obviously the chair of the economic group and also director with the responsibility for planning. So I will defer to Scott on those two. On the third question, I think I was simply going to say that, yes, it's up to the groups themselves as to who they nominate. On the question, the IGB, I'm afraid I'm going to defer to Louise. So maybe if I could pass over to Scott first.
Okay, Scott.
I'm going to do a bit of preparing here as well, but I'll start with the regeneration forums and the issue. The way we're structuring the economic subgroup is we have a strategic core, which is due to meet, I think it's next week, and then that's supported by a small transport group, and then a sounding board of representatives of local business. So that sounding board is quite a big. It meet infrequently, and yes, we do anticipate some private sector members of regeneration forums to be on that sounding board. In respect of streamlining the planning process, the Chief Legal Officer and myself have discussed this at some length. It might be better if Jerry clarifies what our thoughts are on that, convener, if you're happy for me to bring in Jerry.
Gerard. Yeah, on that particular issue.
Convener, Councillor Quinn asked a direct question about the planning situation. As far as I understand it, the heads of planning in Scotland are approaching the Scottish Government, or certainly they're looking at approaching the Scottish Government for guidance in terms of relaxation for these outdoor spaces. Perhaps Councillor Quinn's referring to sort of these outdoor cafe areas, if I may presume such, for further guidance. If I can help Councillor Quinn by responding, that we're receiving a number of inquiries just now in terms of making outdoor spaces available, and there are broadly, convener, 4 issues to deal with. You'd be expecting officers, I'm sure, to deal with a pragmatic solution to the issues that we're confronted with just now. These are basically, in terms of these outdoor areas, bylaws, in terms of consumption of alcohol, the licensing board and its procedures to approve or to change any application, because it could be quite a substantial change, neighbours, members of the public. The planning issues are certainly relevant here in terms of the requirement to have planning permission for new outdoor areas. You'd expect that, because there could be structures, there could be spaces, it could be pavements that could be used, and obviously there could be landlord's consent. But basically, convener, I think the members of this council would be asking officers to try to bring forward some pragmatic solutions. Those pragmatic solutions would require certain relaxations of national legislation for that. We try to find other ways around that if we possibly could, but we have to bear 3 things in mind: the public, neighbours, the licence and trade in general for the local economy, and we're trying to balance those things.
Okay, I think, Louise, are you coming in on the IJB?
Through yourself, convener, it's just to say the humanitarian recovery is part of the council's process and isn't necessarily part of the IJB process. But and I'm leading that as a corporate director from the council perspective. But as you would imagine, I have ensured that there was a carers rep who's on the group. I've asked Your Voice, who's our advisory network, just because they have contact with a couple of thousand people, to find some community representation in the group. And I've also got a meeting with a number of third sector providers tomorrow to see how they're, and small and big, to see how they're going to be represented on that group. So just to provide some assurance to Councillor Quinn, we're making sure we've got significant representation from across parties.
Okay. Gerard, do you want to come in on the issue in relation to the sounding board that Councillor McElhenney has raised?
Right. Convener, Martin's report clearly asks for the committee's approval to the principle of this, for the composition of this. This certainly reflects political balance, and it is the convention, and I affirm that to Councillor McElhenney and indeed to the committee, that the administration has the option of being the chair. It is a matter entirely for elected members. I can't point to anything in standing orders. It's a convention and it's for the members to decide, and it'll be for the members to decide within the principles of this which members they want. Those could be declared now, or they could be intimated to Martin at a later stage.
Okay, so any other questions anybody's got?
So
Chris?
just to clarify, that doesn't really mean anything, just because that's the way we done it 30 years ago. But in the report,
Because it's not quite how we done it 30 years ago. It's how we currently do it. Because in terms of various groups within the council, which could be classed as sounding boards, it is a member of the administration that chairs those.
The report clearly states that the sounding board is not covered by the scheme of administration. So it should be up to the board to appoint the chair.
That is required to be there for purposes of this. If members get together, if two members or more ever get together, that is effectively a public meeting if it's done under the principles of the council. This meeting would not work. That meeting of those members would not work. That's why it's a sounding board. That's why it's a working group. It takes it out with the terms of the standing order, and we're being transparent. They are saying that members have the opportunity to be a sounding board, a working group. Thus, there is no public entitlement of the public to attend. But certainly, every practice that the council has operated says two things: administration for chair. But I have to fully acknowledge that is a matter for the elected members in that group to decide upon.
Absolutely, and we have current examples in terms of the members' budget working group, and an example in terms of the leadership sounding board.
Who chairs the Women's Forum again? Just for clarity.
It's Councillor Quinn. That was an appointment made by the council. That's fine, Chris. If you want to take it to a vote, take it to a vote. Okay, that's fine. So, okay, is there any other questions? No. Okay, so I'll move the recommendations in the report. Any amendments?
An amendment that the sounding board appoints the chair itself.
Okay. Right, Gerard.
There's a motion in your name, convener, for the recommendations as written. There's an amendment from Councillor McElhenney for the recommendations as written, except that the principle of the sounding board is agreed, but that members will decide their chair. Roll call vote, please, convener. And that is motion and amendment. The motion is yours. The amendment is Councillor McElhenney's. Councillor Brooks.
Motion.
Councillor Clockerty. Motion. Councillor McCabe.
Motion.
Councillor McElhenney. Councillor Quinn.
Amendment.
And Councillor Robertson.
Amendment.
Convener, there are 3 members voting for the motion, and there are 3 members voting for the amendment. I'm just going to check standing orders in one regard. I'm just checking one position with the standing orders. If there is an equality of voting in terms of a specific elected member, the casting vote can't be used. But I don't think that applies because it's not a specific member, but I'm just having that check.
Okay.
Convener, the provisions of standing orders that provide for no casting vote in certain circumstances, they do not apply. Therefore, a casting vote is appropriate in this case. A casting vote is appropriate.
Okay, I cast my vote for the motion.
Convener, I declare the motion carried. Recommendations per the report.
Okay, can I ask you that you write to the respective group representatives or leaders and seek nominations?
Convener, we will seek nominations as required.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, that takes us on to item 12, National Records of Scotland, mid-year population estimates. We obviously had a members' briefing on this the other day. Stephen, I think you're going to speak to the report.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Just very briefly, as you've mentioned, this report provides details to the subcommittee of the population estimates which were recently published, and also the new population projections for Inverclyde and wider Scottish areas. As you say, there was quite a detailed briefing yesterday and a presentation. It was well attended and we had a good discussion and a lot of questions covered in that. So I don't intend to go into any details of the report itself. Maybe just to highlight the recommendations, just asking the subcommittee to note the content of the report. Also to remit to the corporate management team to bring back a further report outlining proposals to do some additional research in this area to help inform our strategy going forward for the council, and also to remit to the LOIP Population Partnership to consider the content and the statistics in this report and to agree any actions and connections with these. But I'm happy to take any questions from any members today as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Elizabeth, you want to come in?
Thanks, Convener. I'm broadly supportive of the paper. I think it was a really, really helpful briefing yesterday, extraordinarily helpful, in fact, to the point where I had an awful lot to reflect on as a result of it. I'm very, very aware of time, and I don't want to kind of rehearse all the things I was going to say to beautifully, persuade everybody with my eloquence and fabulousness. But basically, it's the fourth bullet point in the recommendations is the only bit that I think I have an issue with. And really, I just don't feel that on my watch now as a councillor, I can with all integrity say that it's okay just to go and do some more research on the same issue that we've done, to my reckoning, at least 3 or 4 pieces of research over the last 20 years on. And I'm going back to Llewellyn Davis study, which I think was 1999 or 2000. We certainly did one through the repopulation group when Paul Wallace was the chair of it. Aubrey, I think we also did one when you were the chair of it, under the auspices of the Alliance Board more broadly. That's 3 that I can think of offhand. And I just don't think in all good conscience I can say that that's okay. I do have a proposed amendment. I don't know if it's possible for me to share my screen.
Well, you probably can, but I mean, I suppose if you maybe, in a sense, ask the question first of officers before you put forward your proposal as to what do they mean by sort of additional research.
I'd probably more likely to say what I would like them to mean.
You can have desktop research, and obviously you can have commission consultants to carry out research.
I'm just aware I don't really want to kind of generate 20 odd minutes of unnecessary debate. So I've thought about this quite a lot, and I've got quite a succinct notion of what I think should be involved in this. So I wouldn't mind going through that if that's okay.
Share that with us, yeah.
So I'll read it rather than going through the faff you're sharing. So to remit CMT to bring back a report showing how actions from previous key research and policy documents, such as ones I've mentioned, relating to depopulation and repopulation have been successfully implemented or not prior to any further new work being undertaken in the field. Further, to analyse this to better inform recommendations for action from this point forward, to bring about changes in population, multiple deprivations and health inequalities, and to ensure that actions are taken forward. To use analysis as an evidence base, outlining the need for any emerging resources to enable progress. That's a key part of it, is using what we have to actually help us look at what the resource requirements are for us moving forward. And the second part is to provide a data set for the area which justifies and shows the long-standing assertion that there is a discrepancy between NRS's projection methodology and the reality of population statistics within Inverclyde, which disproportionately harm us both financially and in reputation, and to do this prior to the release of the 2021 census data in 22-23. So really it's to do a synthesis of the previous research that's been undertaken to make sure that we did do the things that came out of that, or if we didn't, why we didn't, before we actually undertake any new research.
Okay, hold that thought. I mean, I don't have any problems in principle with that, but hold that thought. Bring in Lynn next, and then we can go to Stephen to comment on your suggestion, and obviously Lynn respond to Lynn's question. Lynn?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty wholeheartedly agree with what Councillor Robertson has said. So I've got questions, but really is about us going round and round and round in a circle and not actually making progress. So I'm actually happy just to hold back my questions and go with Lizzie's recommendations.
Okay, any other questions? No. Okay, Stephen, do you want to come in on that suggestion proposal from Councillor Robertson?
Yeah, thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Robertson. I think that was some very useful suggestions there by Councillor Robertson. The intention is, as outlined in the report, that the corporate management team certainly wanted to have a discussion around this and to scope out exactly what research might be required and what that would look like, what the cost implications would be, what the scope of that research would be. And I think Councillor Robertson makes a few good points that we do need to look back the way and see what has been done, and I'm very much happy to take those points on board in terms of the discussion with the corporate management team in terms of the scope of the work going forward. So that would be my feedback to Councillor Robertson. Thanks.
Okay, any comments? Right, okay, so can we agree the recommendations with basically the amendment stroke additions that are being proposed?
So, Convener, the bullet point there, number 4, that's been amended, and what Councillor Robertson read out has been inserted instead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy with that? Okay, agreed. Okay, that takes us on to item 13, unlucky for some. Proposed temporary layup of cruise ships, Peel Ports update. Scott.
Thank you, Convener. Very briefly, this report describes a meeting that we had with Peel Ports senior managers following the last committee and includes their position as indicated to us, and it also encloses copies of correspondence from local MP and MSP.
Okay, just to clarify, Scott, today you also sourced an email that Stuart McMillan MSP sent to the First Minister as well, and that's been circulated to members.
But hopefully that's been circulated.
Yeah, I think it has. Okay.
Quinn's seen that? I beg your pardon, Convener. No.
Okay.
Councillor Quinn may not have seen that, Convener.
Okay, could somebody forward the email on to Councillor Quinn? Scott, could you do that? Forward that email on to Councillor Quinn? Yep. Scott will do it.
I don't think I've seen that either.
Okay.
Do it this time.
Right, anti Councillor Clougherty. So essentially, in terms of the representations, Ronnie Cowan MP has made representations to the UK government. Stuart McMillan has made representations to the UK government and the Scottish government. And Scott will confirm this. At this point in time, we've not seen any responses to any of the correspondence. Is that correct, Scott?
That's what I've been advised, yeah, no responses at this stage.
Okay, any questions or comments from members?
Just on the second paragraph before welcome their decision, was there any clarity that he was saddened that he had to welcome our decision, or was he saddened that we'd made the decision?
Oh, sorry. All right, I didn't read that. Right. Okay, Graham.
Yeah, thanks very much. At 2.2, it clarifies in Scott's paper that under international law, that the cruise ships can't be refused if they're declared free from disease. Were officers aware of that information on our meeting on the 5th of May, where we decided to write? Because it may have changed the tone of our letter if we were of opinion that international law could not.
Scott?
Thank you, Convener. The international law issue was not something we were broadly aware of, but it was maybe expressed because we are the companies where that law applies to who are refusing entry to cruise ships. The report simply expresses what Peel Ports have expressed to us. I think my paper that went up originally used the word commercial, and that's in the context that Peel advertise their venues in the UK as being so while they cannot turn away a vehicle, and I think they understand that, there is still a commercial discussion takes place over which facility that a cruise operator would go to.
Yeah, but the reality is the cruise ship that turned up on the Clyde yesterday didn't turn up and say, by the way, can we have safe harbour? Clyde Peel Ports entered into a commercial contract with them and brought the ship there, and there's another 2 on their way as we understand it. So we were quite clear when we first discussed this, and there was quite clear advice from our officers, our health officers, health board and our officers, that it wouldn't be appropriate at this time, given the local health emergency, for us to take on the responsibility of dealing with these cruise ships. But we were also aware that we couldn't stop the cruise ships coming. So what we did was we wrote to Peel Ports and asked them voluntarily not to bring the cruise ships. So we've had engagement with them, we've had correspondence, there's now been a meeting, and their position is as set out in the letter that we saw previously and in the sort of verbal communication here. And as at this point in time, they have chosen not to berth any cruise ships in Greenock. They have said that they're bringing 3 to Glasgow. So given the information that's in the report, we need to decide what, the report is a noting report, but we need to decide if we want to do anything further. So we've got 3 pieces of communication, 2 to the UK government and 1 to the Scottish government. I would certainly like to see the responses to those communications. So I would certainly like us to ask our officers to pursue with the MP and MSPs the responses to those reports, and if those responses are obviously received by the next meeting, that those are brought to the committee. The question is, do we do anything beyond that? Do we make direct representations ourselves, or do we wait to see the outcome of those representations? So open it up for contributions.
Can I just come back slightly on what you said? You gave a summary of what happened on the meeting of the 5th of May, which I actually agree with. That's what happened. What was brought in, that was the reason I supported the letter, but what was brought in at the meeting, but subsequently as well, was this whole commercial issue. And obviously, if the international law had been more clear, and if we were sure that that was the reason the letter was going, not on Peel Port making money, which I don't object to, then I would have taken a different position. But so your recollection of the 5th of May is accurate. It was on the health, it was on please don't come, we can't stop you. And if that's not what's been spun in the local press, that's all I'm saying.
No, but we can't be held accountable for the local press. And we've tried to maintain a reasonable relationship with Clyde Port and tried to continue to work with them, and we want to continue to work with them. They are major partners of ours, and going forward, obviously, we would hope that the cruise industry will start up again, and we'll see the completion of the project we've got, which is not without its own challenges as well. But there's nothing that's happened since that meeting to change my mind that it's not the right thing for us to continue to oppose cruise ships berthing in Greenock. The issue is, given we've made that view clear, we've made the representations direct to Peel, we are aware of the representations that our local parliamentarians are made. Other than noting the report, do we want to do anything further at this time? Chris?
Yeah, thank you, convener. Just to clarify my position, which I think was most people's position, was I didn't have an issue with berthing in Greenock. It was based on the health board's objection. It was the fact that the ships would then moor in the Clyde Estuary within the health board area, and the crew on those ships could then obviously become infected and create an emergency situation. So I'm not sure anything's really changed, because although the ships aren't 3 of them that I can currently track, but I have held 17 potentially over the season. Even though they're not berthing in Greenock and disembarking crew, that a fair assumption would be that perhaps are COVID-free, considering the time they've been at sea. The issue was the ongoing mooring in the Clyde. So I'm wondering if Scott Allen has sought clarity on King George V's ability to berth any more than 2 cruise ships at the one time, because obviously they've got 1 in there at the moment, and that slip, I don't see how they would get 3 in there. So that would mean 1 would need to leave at safe berthing, and the only safe mooring would then be coming back down Clyde to either off a Greenock or Loch Striven, etc. And obviously, if it's more than 3, if it's because it is a commercial cash cow, so we could potentially have vessels. By all means, they don't berth in Greenock, but they still moor off Greenock. So I'm just curious, because King George V, I was looking at the map, I can't quite determine if it's in Renfrewshire, if it's in Glasgow City Council, because it kind of sits right on the border, but it's still within Greater Glasgow and Clyde's Health Board's area. So the Health Board had obviously lodged an objection to the ships berthing in Greenock, because they didn't want them to moor within the Health Board area, considering the impacts we'd had with COVID. So I'm not sure what would have changed with their position, because whether a boat's berthing at KG5 or berthing at Greenock and then mooring somewhere on the Clyde, it still presents the same risk to the Health Board, which guided my decision to object in the first place. So has there been any ongoing dialogue with officers at Renfrewshire and Glasgow City Council, in particular with Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board, to see if their objection is still maintained? Because nothing should really be any different just because the ships have had some nice pictures under Dumbarton Rock or the Erskine Bridge. The risk is still exactly the same as it was when we as a council decided that we would object to it.
Okay, Scott, you want to come in on those points?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, we've had limited discussions with Glasgow. KG5 is Glasgow, it's not Renfrewshire. One vessel mooring in KG5 is a definite, as evidenced by the ship going up the river. And Glasgow had accepted that to the basis there were 43 crew members on board. The other 2 vessels, I understand, are potentials and not confirmed, although Glasgow may know. And again, the numbers on the ships are low. We're advised around about 40 crew per vessel. So from our perspective, there is no further indication that a vessel will come to Greenock at this time. Glasgow will have to deal with what is proposed in KG5. People have assured us that if there are any proposal, they will give us a heads up and they'll give us plenty of warning and give us time to discuss health and safety management. But beyond that, I can't really give any more detail.
Okay. Any other questions?
So Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board are now fine with the ships berthing within the Greater and Glasgow Clyde Health Board area just because it's not at Greenock, is it KG5? Because that doesn't really make sense to me, because the strain on the health service would still be similar.
Well, I'll bring Louise in that, but I mean, Greater Glasgow and Clyde, in a sense, were in the same position as us, as opposing it, but not being able to stop it, right? And wasn't a formal planning application or anything like that, formal objection. So I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm quite confident that Glasgow City Council and the Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board know that there's a cruise ship berthed at King George V docks in Glasgow, because it was on the STV News last night, as was Councillor Clotterty. So I would imagine if they had concerns over that, they'd have been making appropriate representations to Glasgow City Council and whoever, Scottish Government, on that. But Louise, I don't know if you've got any information to add on that.
Through yourself, Convener, sorry, no, I don't have any more information in relation to that.
Okay, so we're in a position where we've got this further information, we know there's representations been made. I would suggest that we note the report, but ask officers to pursue the local politicians to see if they've got an answer to their correspondence and bring an update report to the next meeting. Sorry? Okay, good stuff. See, it's good to have friends in high places. Yeah. Okay, is that agreed? I know we're on a state of shock because he knows Grant Sharps, but right, is that agreed? Yeah. Okay, so just a minute short of 7 o'clock. Actually, on the computer, it's absolutely bang on 7 o'clock. Thank you for your forbearance. I think we need to try and keep these meetings a bit shorter in the future, find a way of doing it. Okay, thanks for all for your participation.